Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Jennifer Nakamura found the photographs scattered across the trail like playing cards, each one showing her own face from angles she'd never been photographed. She stopped dead at mile marker 4 on the Ho River Trail, staring down at the glossy prints that shouldn't exist. Polaroids, old-school instant film, spread across the moss-covered ground in a perfect line. 7 of them, all showing her, standing at her truck this morning, walking past the ranger station, entering the trailhead, close-ups of her face taken from distances that should have been impossible without telephoto lenses. The last photograph showed her standing exactly where she was right now, looking down at the photographs. Jennifer's hand went to her radio automatically, 14 years of training making the motion instinctive. Then she stopped. What would she say? Someone had taken photos of her this morning and somehow developed instant film and scattered them on a trail she'd walked 100 times. It sounded insane. She was a senior ranger at Olympic National Park, the most experienced tracker in the Pacific Northwest District. She'd coordinated search and rescue operations through terrain that broke rookie rangers. She'd found lost hikers in conditions that grounded helicopters. She knew these rainforests the way surgeons knew anatomy. This shouldn't be possible. Jennifer knelt and examined the photographs without touching them, pulling out her iPhone to document each one. The metadata would tell her something. Timestamps, location data if the camera had GPS. Except these were Polaroids, analog, no metadata to extract. The quality bothered her most. Professional grade, perfect focus and exposure in the dim understory light of the Ho rainforest. You didn't get shots like these without skill and expensive equipment, and you definitely didn't get them without the subject noticing they were being photographed from 20 feet away. She'd been alone all morning. Completely alone. Jennifer stood and scanned the forest around her. The Ho rainforest was a temperate jungle, everything wrapped in moss and ferns, Sitka spruce and western hemlock rising 200 feet overhead. The canopy filtered sunlight into a perpetual green twilight. Visibility extended maybe 40 feet before the vegetation swallowed everything in emerald shadows. Perfect place for someone to hide and watch. "Tyler Dawson!" Her voice carried through the humid air, strong and authoritative. "If you can hear me, this is Ranger Nakamura. Your family filed a missing persons report 3 days ago. I'm here to help you." Silence. Just the constant drip of condensation from the moss, the distant rush of the Ho River, and the complete absence of bird calls that she'd noticed but hadn't consciously registered until now. No birds. In a rainforest. That was wrong. Jennifer collected the photographs carefully, sealing them in an evidence bag from her pack. Tyler Dawson, 23 years old, experienced backpacker, had been hiking the Ho River Trail solo when he'd stopped responding to his girlfriend's texts 4 days ago. His car was still at the visitor center, tent and supplies missing. No indication of where he'd planned to camp. Standard missing person case. Or it had been, until the photographs appeared. She continued up the trail, every sense heightened. The forest pressed in around her, thick and green and alive with moisture. The path was well maintained here, a boardwalk protecting fragile root systems from foot traffic. Her boots made hollow sounds on the wood. At mile 6, she found Tyler's tent. It had been set up in a designated camping area, properly secured and staked, rainfly taut and clean. Nothing about it suggested abandonment or emergency. Jennifer approached slowly, calling out again. No response. The tent was empty. Sleeping bag neatly rolled, personal items organized in stuff sacks. No signs of struggle or hasty departure. She documented everything with her phone, then noticed Tyler's backpack sitting just outside the tent entrance. Inside the pack, wallet with ID and credit cards, phone with dead battery, first aid kit, food supplies for a week, water filter. Everything an experienced hiker would bring. Everything except the hiker himself. Jennifer plugged Tyler's phone into her portable charger and waited for it to boot. While it loaded, she noticed something else. A camera. Nice DSLR, Nikon D750, expensive gear for a 23-year-old. She checked the memory card. 273 photographs. She scrolled through them on the camera's LCD screen, watching Tyler's trip play out in reverse. Shots of the trail, close-ups of moss and ferns, a selfie at the trailhead, driving shots from his car. Then, starting at image 112, the photographs changed. They showed the forest at night, flash frozen in the camera's flash. But in the deep shadows between the trees there were figures. Dark shapes that weren't quite trees, weren't quite human, standing motionless in the background of each shot. Tyler had been photographing them, she realized, documenting them. The timestamps showed he'd taken these over the course of one night from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. The last photograph, number 273, showed the inside of this tent, taken from outside looking in through the mesh door. The angle was impossible. The camera would have to be floating 5 feet off the ground. And in the tent, just visible in the frame, was Tyler, sleeping. Or what looked like Tyler, because his shadow on the tent wall didn't match his body position. The shadow stood upright while Tyler lay horizontal. Jennifer's hands were steady as she transferred the images to her phone via Bluetooth. Professional, methodical, not thinking about what the photographs meant because analysis would come later, after documentation, after evidence collection, after... Tyler's phone finished booting. 47 unread texts from his girlfriend, 6 missed calls from his parents, and 1 video file recorded 3 days ago at 4:47 a.m. Jennifer played it. The video was dark, lit only by the phone's screen glow reflecting off Tyler's face. He whispered into the camera, "Day 3. They're still out there. I counted 23 last night. They don't move when you're looking at them, but when you blink or turn away, they're closer. Always closer. I tried to leave this morning, but my compass doesn't work anymore. It just spins. All of them spin. Every compass I brought." His voice cracked. "I think they're waiting for something. I think they want me to..." The video cut off. Jennifer replayed it twice more, then checked the rest of Tyler's phone. No other videos. No photos. Just texts and calls and normal apps. Whatever Tyler had seen, he'd only documented it once. She stood and swept her gaze across the campsite. Full daylight now, almost noon, but the forest still held that perpetual twilight quality. The moss glowed phosphorescent green, water dripped rhythmically, and between the massive tree trunks in the spaces where shadow pooled thick, she saw them. Figures, human-shaped but wrong, too tall, too thin, standing perfectly still in the deep shade where no person should be standing. Jennifer counted without moving her head, using only her peripheral vision. 8. No, 11. More appearing as her eyes adjusted to the shadows. They didn't move. They just stood there, watching. She pulled out her own camera, a Fujifilm X-T4 she'd bought specifically for documenting wildlife, and took a photograph. The flash fired bright in the dim forest. She checked the LCD screen. Empty forest. The figures weren't there. Jennifer looked up, still there, watching. She took another photograph, flash off this time, checked the screen, empty forest. One more try, video mode, panning slowly across the area where the figures stood. She played back the video. Normal rainforest, moss, trees, ferns, no figures. But when she lowered the camera, they were still there. Closer now. Definitely closer. One of them was maybe 30 feet away, standing beside a Sitka spruce, its form blending into the shadow so perfectly she couldn't tell where shadow ended and entity began. Jennifer's radio crackled. "Ranger Nakamura, checking status. You've been out of contact for 4 hours. Please respond. Over." She keyed the radio, eyes never leaving the figures. "Nakamura here. Located subject Dawson's campsite at mile 6, Ho River Trail. Subject not present. Evidence suggests unusual circumstances. Continuing investigation. Over." Copy that. Be advised, we've had 2 more missing person reports in the last hour. Both hikers on Ho River Trail. Both went incommunicado within the last 24 hours. Requesting you return to station for briefing. Over. 2 more. Jennifer felt something cold settle in her stomach. Negative. I'm close to subject Dawson's last known position. Need to continue while daylight holds. We'll check in at 1600 hours. Over. Long pause. Then, understood. Be careful out there, Jen. Something feels wrong about this one. Over and out. The radio went silent. Jennifer looked back at the shadow figures. They hadn't moved, but there were more of them now. At least 20, 30. Hard to count because they seemed to multiply in her peripheral vision, appearing in spaces that had been empty a moment before. She made a decision based on 14 years of experience and a gut instinct that had never failed her. Tyler was still alive. He'd left his supplies because he'd been chased, and he'd gone deeper into the forest where the shadows were thicker. Jennifer shouldered her pack and left the tent behind, heading up the trail toward Blue Glacier. The boardwalk ended at mile 8, giving way to rough trail that climbed steeply through old-growth forest. Jennifer's legs burned with the grade, her breath coming harder in the humid air. The shadow figures followed, always at the edge of her vision, never quite looking directly at them, because whenever she tried to focus on one, it disappeared. Not disappeared, moved, relocated to a different patch of shadow, where it resumed its motionless watching. At mile 10, Jennifer found the second set of photographs. These weren't Polaroids. They were printed on regular photo paper, color laser prints, scattered across a fallen log. She recognized the subjects immediately. The 2 new missing hikers from this morning's reports. Young couple hiking together, smiling in tourist snapshots from the trailhead. And beneath those photos, older prints, newspaper clippings, missing person posters, Park Service reports. Jennifer's hands shook as she sorted through them. 12 more people. All missing from Olympic National Park over the last 8 years. All from trails in the Ho rainforest. She'd known about some of these cases. Hell, she'd worked 3 of them personally. But she'd never connected them, never seen the pattern because missing persons in wilderness areas were statistically normal. People got lost. They fell. They succumbed to exposure. The park covered nearly 1 million acres of some of the most rugged terrain in the continental United States. But now, seeing all the faces together, she understood. They hadn't gotten lost. They'd been taken. A sound reached her through the trees. Breathing, heavy and rhythmic, like someone sleeping but coming from multiple directions at once. Jennifer turned slowly, tracking the sound. The shadow figures had multiplied. Hundreds of them now, standing in every patch of darkness between the trees, their forms humanoid but stretched, elongated, some 8 feet tall, some crouched low to the ground. And they were breathing. All of them. In perfect synchronization. Jennifer's rational mind tried to parse it. Mass hallucination brought on by environmental factors, possibly fungal spores or gas emissions from decaying vegetation. The Ho rainforest had unique fungal ecosystems. Maybe there was a psychotropic element, something that induced shared visual phenomena. Except that didn't explain the photographs, didn't explain Tyler's missing compass functionality, didn't explain the breathing she was hearing with her own ears. Jennifer Nakamura, her name spoken in a voice that wasn't quite sound, more like pressure in her ears, syllables formed from condensation and shadow. You have walked these forests for 14 years. You have found those who were lost. You have saved those who were dying. But you have never seen us. She spun, looking for the source. The shadow figures hadn't moved, hadn't opened mouths, if they even had mouths. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Where's Tyler Dawson? Her voice came out steady despite the hammering of her heart. Where are the others? They are becoming, as you will become. The forest needs watchers, and we are the forest's eyes. We observe, we wait. We collect those who linger too long in the deep green places where light barely reaches. Jennifer's hand found her bear spray, the canister solid and real in her grip. I'm a federal ranger. I have jurisdiction here. Release the missing persons or I will. You will what? The voice rippled with something that might have been amusement. You cannot fight shadows. You cannot arrest darkness. We are older than your laws, older than your buildings and roads and names for things. We have always been here, in the places between light and dark, watching. The shadow figures moved. All at once, not toward her but rotating, their forms turning to face deeper into the forest, pointing the way with postures that suggested direction, even though they had no visible features. Jennifer understood. They were showing her where Tyler had gone. She followed. The trail disappeared entirely at mile 12, giving way to unmapped wilderness. Jennifer marked her path with surveyor's tape, tying bright orange strips to branches every 100 feet. GPS on her phone showed her position, but the elevation readings were wrong, fluctuating by hundreds of feet from one moment to the next. The shadow figures guided her through terrain that should have been impassable, leading her around deadfalls and across streams where bridges of moss-covered logs appeared exactly where she needed them. The forest grew darker, denser, the canopy so thick overhead that her watch read 2 p.m., but the light suggested dusk. She found Tyler at what her GPS insisted was mile 15, though she couldn't have walked more than a mile from the last trail marker. He sat cross-legged in a grove of ancient cedars, eyes open but unseeing, breathing slowly. Around him, arranged in concentric circles, were the other missing hikers, 11 of them ranging from a teenage girl to an elderly man, all sitting motionless, all breathing in that same synchronized rhythm as the shadow figures. Tyler! Jennifer rushed forward, checking his pulse, his pupils, his responsiveness. Vitals were present but wrong, pulse too slow, body temperature reading 91 degrees on her medical thermometer, pupils fixed and dilated. Tyler, can you hear me? I'm Ranger Nakamura. I'm here to get you out. His eyes moved, tracking to her face. His mouth opened. Can you see them? Yes. No point in lying. I see them. They've been showing me things. Tyler's voice was distant, dreamy. The forest isn't what we think it is. There are layers, dimensions, spaces between the moss and bark where other things live. The shadow people are just one kind. There are others, so many others. Jennifer grabbed his arm, tried to pull him up. He didn't resist, but he didn't help either, his body limp and unresponsive. She'd need a litter to evacuate him, possibly helicopter extraction, except her radio was dead now, just static when she tried to transmit. They want us to watch with them, Tyler continued. That's all. Just watch. Observe. Bear witness to everything the forest does when humans aren't looking. It's not evil. They're not cruel. They just need eyes, consciousness. We'd be like wardens, except permanent. Forever. Nobody's staying forever. Jennifer pulled out her satellite beacon, the emergency device that should trigger a helicopter response regardless of radio coverage. She activated it and clipped it to her vest. We're leaving. Now. The shadow figures moved closer, forming a wall of darkness around the grove. Jennifer counted them automatically, training overriding fear. 217. No. More. They kept multiplying, stepping out of shadows that shouldn't be deep enough to hold them. You found 12 in the forest, the pressure voice said. You will find 12 more tomorrow, and 12 the day after that. The Hoh rainforest draws those who seek solitude, who want to escape the watched world. We give them a different kind of watching, a purpose, an eternal vigil. Jennifer's mind raced through her options. Fight, flight, negotiate, document. She was one person with bear spray and a satellite beacon against something that didn't follow physical laws. But she was also Jennifer Nakamura, and she hadn't failed an extraction in 14 years. Let me take one person out, she said. Tyler. He's young. His family is looking for him. You can keep the others if you have to, but let me take one. Silence. The shadow figures stood motionless. Why that one? The voice finally asked. Because his girlfriend is pregnant. He doesn't know yet. She was going to tell him when he got back. Jennifer was lying, making it up, but putting everything she had into the performance. You want watchers who choose to watch. That requires informed consent. He hasn't been informed. None of them have. More silence. Then, you are clever, Jennifer Nakamura. This is why you have survived 14 years in the forest. But cleverness has limits. The shadow figures parted, creating a path back the way she'd come. Tyler stood up, moving with mechanical precision following the designated route. Take him, the voice said. But you must return. You have seen us now, truly seen us. That creates obligation. In 3 days you will come back to this grove. You will sit with the others. You will join the watching. This is the price of rescue. Jennifer didn't answer. She grabbed Tyler's arm and pulled him toward the path, moving fast, marking her way with more surveyor's tape. The shadow figures watched, but didn't follow. She half carried, half dragged Tyler through the forest, retracing her marked route, forcing her legs to move even when exhaustion threatened to drop her. Tyler followed mechanically, no longer speaking, just breathing that slow, synchronized rhythm. The trail appeared at mile 12, then mile 10, then the boardwalk at mile 8. Jennifer's satellite beacon had been transmitting for hours. Help should be coming, should have arrived already, helicopters and emergency teams flooding the forest. But the forest was empty except for shadows. At mile 6, Tyler's tent was gone. At mile 4, the photographs she'd documented were missing. At mile 2, her surveyor's tape had vanished from the trees. Jennifer emerged at the trailhead at 6:47 p.m. according to her watch, though her GPS said 11:23 a.m. and her iPhone insisted it was still yesterday. Tyler stumbled beside her, no longer catatonic but confused, asking where he was and how he'd gotten here. The parking lot was full of emergency vehicles, rangers and deputies and search teams clustered around radios and maps. Jennifer recognized the incident commander, Dave Reeves, her supervisor, a man she'd worked with for 8 years. Nakamura. He rushed forward. Jesus Christ, where have you been? We've had teams searching for you for 16 hours. Your beacon never activated. We thought... He stopped, seeing Tyler. Is that Dawson? Found him at mile 12, Jennifer said automatically. Possible exposure, altered mental status, needs immediate medical evaluation. EMTs swarmed Tyler, loading him onto a gurney, checking vitals, asking questions he couldn't answer. Jennifer let Dave lead her to an ambulance, let a paramedic check her over, listened to the debriefing questions without really hearing them. Her phone had 63 missed calls. Her family, friends, colleagues. She'd been missing for 16 hours, they said, gone completely dark. Her truck had been found at the trailhead, but she'd vanished. What happened out there? Dave asked quietly, sitting beside her in the ambulance. And don't give me the official line. I know that look. I've seen it on rangers who've been through bad situations. What did you see? Jennifer looked past him to the forest edge, where the Hoh River Trail disappeared into green twilight. Shadow figures stood there, just visible in the spaces between trees, watching. I found Tyler, she said. That's all. The rest is... I need time to process. Write my report properly. Dave studied her face, then nodded. Take tomorrow off. Hell, take 3 days. You've earned it. We'll do the formal debrief when you're ready. Jennifer went home, showered, ate, slept for 12 hours, woke to sunshine streaming through her bedroom window and birds singing and everything normal and mundane and real. Tyler Dawson was released from the hospital after 2 days of observation. No physical injuries, no explanation for his memory loss, or why his body temperature had been so low. He remembered starting his hike. He remembered setting up his tent, then nothing until Jennifer had found him emerging from the forest. The other 2 missing hikers were never found. Neither were the 11 people whose photos Jennifer had seen arranged on that log, though she could find no record of having documented those photos on her phone or camera. Jennifer returned to work on day 4, filed her report, attended the debrief, answered questions clinically and precisely, sticking to observable facts, omitting everything that couldn't be explained. On day 7, she requested vacation time, 2 weeks, personal reasons. On day 8, she drove back to Olympic National Park, parked at the Hoh River Trail Visitor Center, and started walking. Dave found her at mile 4. "I knew you'd come back," he said. "Jen, whatever happened out there, you can't stop me," she interrupted. "I made a deal. I broke it by not returning on day 3. Now they're taking people faster. 2 more disappeared yesterday, 4 this morning. It's escalating because I didn't keep my word. There's no they, Jen. There's wildlife and weather and bad decisions, that's all. You're experiencing PTSD from a traumatic search and rescue. We have counselors, professionals who can help. Look at the shadows between those trees," Jennifer said quietly. "Really look. Tell me you don't see them." Dave looked. His face went pale. Those are just dark spots. Shade. There's nothing." "There's everything," Jennifer said. "And I'm the only one who can stop them from taking more people because I'm the one who broke the agreement." She walked away from him, deeper into the forest, following the trail she knew by heart. Dave called after her but didn't follow. Later, he'd file a report. Later, there would be search teams and investigations and speculation. Later, her name would join the list of rangers who disappeared in Olympic National Park, another unsolved mystery. But Jennifer Nakamura didn't disappear. She walked to mile 15, to the grove of ancient cedars where 12 people sat in concentric circles, breathing in synchronized rhythm. She recognized some of them from missing person photos. Others were new. There was an empty space in the inner circle, between a teenage girl and an elderly man. Jennifer sat down, cross-legged, feeling her breathing slow and synchronized with the others. The shadow figures surrounded them, hundreds of them, standing in every patch of darkness, watching, waiting, eternal guardians of the deep green places where light barely reached. And Jennifer Nakamura, senior ranger, 14 years of service, expert tracker, survivor of impossible searches, she began to watch with them. Not because she'd been forced, not because she'd had no choice, but because in those 3 days away from the forest, lying in her bed, listening to normal sounds and seeing normal shadows, she'd realized something terrible. The shadow figures hadn't been lying. They'd shown her the truth. The forest was full of layers and dimensions and spaces between where other things lived. She'd seen it. Really seen it. And now that she had, the normal world felt like a photograph, flat and two-dimensional and false. The forest needed watchers, people who could see all its layers, who could bear witness to everything that happened in the spaces between light and dark. Jennifer Nakamura had always been good at watching, at observing, at seeing what others missed. Now she would watch forever. The shadow figures welcomed her with silence and stillness. The other watchers breathed beside her. The forest grew darker as afternoon faded to evening, and Jennifer's consciousness expanded, stretching out through moss and bark and shadow, seeing through 1,000 eyes that weren't quite eyes, observing every deer that walked the trails, every elk that grazed the meadows, every hiker who thought they walked alone. They never walked alone. The watchers saw everything. And when Dave Reeves came looking for her 3 days later, leading a search team of 6 rangers through the Hoh River Trail, Jennifer saw him from a dozen different angles, watched him search the grove where she sat motionless, watched him walk within 10 feet of her without seeing anything but trees and shadows. "She's not here," Dave said into his radio, voice tight with frustration and grief. "Mile 15 is clear. No signs of Nakamura. No signs of any of the missing persons. It's like they just vanished." Jennifer wanted to call out to him, wanted to stand and wave and be found. But her body wouldn't move, didn't need to move. Moving was for people who had somewhere to go. Watchers stayed still. The search team left. The forest grew quiet again. And Jennifer Nakamura watched. She watched the seasons change, watched snow fall and melt, watched ferns uncurl in spring and moss glow electric green after rain. She watched hikers come and go, some finding their way safely, others lingering too long in the deep shadows where the shadow figures waited. She watched as her family declared her dead, watched her memorial service from 1,000 different angles through shadow eyes that weren't hers anymore but weren't not hers either. Watched Dave Reeves retire early, haunted by the rangers he couldn't find, watched Tyler Dawson return to the forest again and again, drawn by something he couldn't name, searching for answers he'd never find. Jennifer Nakamura watched it all. And in the deepest, quietest part of what had been her consciousness, she understood the truth the shadow figures had never spoken aloud. They hadn't recruited her. She'd been one of them all along. Those 14 years of finding lost hikers, of seeing tracks others missed, of navigating darkness that should have been impassable. She'd never been quite human, never been quite solid. Just shadow pretending at flesh, watching and waiting for the moment when she'd remember what she really was. The forest had always had its eyes. Jennifer Nakamura had just been one of them, walking in human shape, until the day she finally came home. The shadow figures didn't move. They never moved. They just watched. They always watched. And now Jennifer watched with them, forever and ever. In the deep green places where light barely reached and shadows breathed with synchronized rhythm, and the forest kept its secrets behind a wall of eternal silent vigilance. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what Jennifer really was. The deer had been opened from the inside. David Ramirez had field-dressed hundreds of animals in his 20 years with the Forest Service, knew every method poachers used to butcher game in the backcountry. This wasn't any of them. The white-tailed doe lay in a clearing off the Brule Lake Trail, her ribcage spread outward like petals, sternum snapped from within. No entry wound, no bullet hole or arrow puncture. The organs were gone, but there was almost no blood, just a few dark streaks frozen into the November snow. He crouched beside the carcass, his knees cracking in the 17-degree air. His breath formed clouds that hung motionless in the stillness. The forest around him was too quiet. No chickadees, no nuthatches, not even the distant drumming of a piloted woodpecker. Just the occasional creak of frozen birch limbs overhead. David pulled off his right glove and touched the deer's exposed ribs. Cold, but not frozen solid. Dead maybe 6 hours, no more than 8. The bones had a strange texture, rougher than they should be, almost porous. He'd seen calcium deficiency cause brittle bones in deer before, but never anything like this. These ribs looked partially dissolved. His Motorola radio crackled, making him flinch. "Ranger Ramirez, this is Base. You at the Brule Lake Trail yet?" He pressed the transmit button. Affirmative. "Found something you're not going to believe." "The Dawson kid?" "Negative. A deer. Something's wrong with it." He paused, trying to find words that wouldn't sound insane. "I'm going to need someone from wildlife management to look at this." Static hissed for a moment. "Copy that. But David, focus on finding Tyler Dawson. Family's going crazy down here. 22 years old, experienced hiker, been missing since yesterday morning. You're our closest asset." David stood, his knees protesting. Understood. Continuing search pattern. He'd been a ranger long enough to know the statistics. Most missing persons in Superior National Forest turned up within 48 hours, usually embarrassed and dehydrated after getting turned around on unmarked trails. The forest covered over 3 million acres, stretched along the Canadian border where Minnesota thinned out into endless boreal wilderness. Easy to get lost. Harder to stay lost if you kept your head. Tyler Dawson's truck had been found at the Caribou Lake trailhead yesterday afternoon, engine cold, driver's door slightly ajar. His father had driven up from Duluth to check on him after Tyler missed a scheduled phone call. The younger Dawson had come up for a solo hiking trip, planning to camp near Eagle Mountain, the highest point in Minnesota at 2,301 feet. His gear was gone from the truck. Tent, sleeping bag, backpack, all missing. David checked his Garmin GPS. The coordinates for Tyler's vehicle were 3 miles southwest. The deer was between the trailhead and Eagle Mountain, right along the logical route Tyler would have taken. He pulled out his camera, a Canon PowerShot that the district supervisor had finally authorized last year, and documented the carcass from multiple angles. The photos would look wrong, he knew. The spreading rib cage, the missing organs, the almost total absence of blood. It would all seem impossible in the flat dimensionality of a digital image. He hiked on, following the Brule Lake Trail as it wound through dense stands of white spruce and jack pine. The snow was 6 inches deep here, deeper where it had drifted against fallen logs. He watched for tracks, any sign of human passage. Found nothing but deer prints and the delicate tracery of snowshoe hair. After 40 minutes, he reached the junction where the trail split, left toward Brule Lake, right climbing toward Eagle Mountain. David stopped, scanning the snow. There, a single boot print, partially filled in but still visible. Men's size 10 or 11, Vibram sole pattern heading right. He photographed it, then followed. The climb steepened. His thighs burned as he pushed upward through the snow, his breath coming harder in the thin, cold air. Superior National Forest wasn't dramatic terrain. No mountains like the Rockies, no towering cliffs. Just endless rolling hills covered in ancient forest, lakes carved by glaciers 10,000 years ago, and a silence that could swallow you whole. He found the second deer at the base of a granite outcropping. This one was a buck, 8 points, maybe 170 pounds when alive. Opened from the inside like the first, rib cage spread, organs missing, almost no blood. But this one was different. Its antlers had been snapped off at the skull, the bone bases showing the same porous, partially dissolved texture. And something had been carved into the granite beside it. David stepped closer, his pulse beginning to hammer. The carving was crude but deliberate, a circle with radiating lines like a child's drawing of the sun. Except the lines were wrong, too many of them, 40 or 50 radiating outward in uneven lengths. And at the center where the sun's face should be, there was a spiral that seemed to pull inward, deeper into the stone than should be possible. He took photos, his hands shaking slightly. Not from cold. 20 years in the Forest Service. Bachelor's degree in forestry from University of Minnesota. Master's in park management from Michigan Tech. David Ramirez didn't believe in monsters or curses or any of the superstitious bullshit that tourists sometimes brought with them into the woods. He'd rescued lost hikers, treated snake bites, fought forest fires, pulled drowning swimmers from frigid lakes. The wilderness could kill you in 100 mundane ways. Hypothermia, dehydration, falling, getting lost. But it did so through natural processes, explicable and predictable. This felt different. He pulled out his phone, a basic LG flip phone, the smartphone revolution still a couple years away. But there was no signal this deep in the forest. The radio would work for another mile or two before the terrain blocked it completely. He considered calling it in, requesting backup. But what would he say? Found some dead deer and a weird carving. He could already hear the jokes from the younger rangers back at base. The boot prints continued upward. Tyler Dawson's prints had to be. David followed. The afternoon light was failing, shadows pooling between the trees. Temperature dropping fast, probably down to 12 degrees now, would hit single digits once the sun set completely. David had his cold weather gear, knew he could bivouac if necessary, but he didn't want to spend a night out here. Not with those deer carcasses, those impossible carvings. Not with the forest so utterly silent. He climbed for another 30 minutes before he smelled the smoke. Wood smoke, faint but unmistakable, carried on the still air. David's hopes rose. A campfire meant Tyler Dawson might be alive, might have simply gotten turned around and decided to wait for rescue. He increased his pace, pushing through deepening snow. The camp was in a small clearing below the final approach to Eagle Mountain's summit. A dome tent, bright orange, staked down with professional precision. A fire ring with embers still glowing orange in the gathering dusk. A backpack leaning against a fallen log. Green north face with the logo visible. No Tyler Dawson. Tyler! David's voice echoed off the hillside, swallowed by the trees. Tyler Dawson, this is the Forest Service. Nothing. Not even an echo returning. David approached the camp slowly, that wrong feeling intensifying. The tent was zipped shut. He knocked on the nylon fabric. Tyler, anyone inside? No response. He unzipped the tent, playing his mag light across the interior. Empty sleeping bag, still unrolled. A stuffed sack with spare clothes. A Nalgene bottle half full of water, frozen solid, and something that made David's stomach clench. A journal, spiral bound, lying open to a page filled with manic handwriting. He picked it up carefully, his light illuminating the words. Day 3. The deer are wrong. Found another one this morning, opened from inside. No tracks leading to it, no tracks leaving. How did something open it from the inside and leave no marks in the snow? The sound came again last night, closer. Not a wolf, not a cougar. Nothing I've ever heard. High-pitched but also somehow deep, like it's coming from everywhere at once. Like the forest itself is screaming. I carved the symbol again. 4th time. The book said 7 times, 7 locations, forms a protective circle. But I don't think it's working. I don't think anything works against this. The trees move when I'm not looking. I know that sounds crazy, but I'll be walking and I'll turn around and the forest is different behind me. Trees in different positions, the trail gone. Then I blink and it's back to normal. I'm so hungry. I ate all my food yesterday, but I'm still hungry. So hungry it hurts. But I'm afraid to leave the camp, afraid of what I'll do if I leave the circle. If someone finds this, don't follow the spiral carvings. Don't look at them too long. They're not protection, they're invitations. The entry ended there, the pen trailing off mid-word. The date at the top of the page was yesterday, November 18th, 2009. But Tyler had written day 3 as if he'd been out here longer. David's hands trembled as he flipped back through the journal. The earlier entries were normal enough. Notes about the hiking route, observations about bird species, a sketch of a particularly beautiful sunset over Brule Lake. Then, 3 pages back, the handwriting changed, became tighter, more frantic. Found a book in the old foundation near Caribou Lake. Shouldn't have touched it, but I couldn't help it. The cover was leather, symbols burned into it, writing in French and something older. Latin, maybe. Something about le Wendigo, the hunger that walks, the eating that is never satisfied. There were rituals in the book, protections, 7 circles, 7 symbols. Draw them in stone and wood and earth. Keep the Wendigo at bay. But there was another section, instructions for calling it, for becoming it. The book said, hunger is the door. Hunger is the transformation. Let yourself starve long enough in the winter woods and something else starts to wake up inside you. Something that was always there, waiting. I'm not going to do it, obviously, but I keep thinking about it. The hunger, the transformation. What would it feel like? To be so hungry that you turn into hunger itself? David's throat felt tight. He grabbed Tyler's backpack, tore it open, found camping gear, a water filter, a first aid kit. No food, not a single granola bar or energy gel or freeze-dried meal packet. Tyler Dawson had come into the wilderness with no food at all. The light was almost gone now, the forest reduced to dark shapes against a darkening sky. David's radio crackled again. Ranger Ramirez requesting status update. Over. He fumbled for the radio. I found Dawson's camp. He's not here. Found a journal. He's in serious trouble. I need backup and we need a full search team at first light. Copy that. What's his status? Injured? David looked at the journal in his hand, at the manic handwriting describing impossible things. Unknown, but I think he's experiencing psychological issues. Possible hypothermia-induced psychosis. He's been out here at least 3 days with no food. Jesus, okay, we're organizing a team now. Can you stay at the camp until morning? David looked around the clearing. At the tent, the dead fire, the dark forest pressing in from all sides. Every instinct screamed at him to descend to get back to his truck to leave this place. But Tyler Dawson was out here somewhere. Lost, starving, possibly dying. That was the job. Find people. Bring them home. Affirmative. I'll maintain position at the camp. He built up the fire, feeding it with deadfall from the surrounding woods. The flames pushed back the darkness but seemed to make the silence worse somehow, more oppressive. He heated water, made instant coffee from his pack, tried to eat a protein bar but found his appetite gone. The journal sat beside him. He knew he shouldn't read more. It was evidence, should be preserved for the sheriff's department, for the search and rescue coordinator. But he couldn't stop himself from picking it up, flipping to the final pages. Tyler had drawn the spiral symbol over and over, filling page after page. Sometimes small, sometimes taking up the entire sheet. With each iteration, the spiral seemed to deepen, to pull the eye inward toward a center that never came. Beside the drawings, fragments of text in that same frantic handwriting. The hunger is singing. I can hear it in the trees, in the wind, in my own bones. 7 circles, but I've only made 4, not enough time. It's coming. So hungry I can taste blood in my mouth, but I haven't eaten anything. Haven't eaten in days. But I'm not weak. I'm stronger. Faster. My teeth hurt. Is that normal? The Ojibwe were right. The Cree were right. The Wendigo is real. Not a metaphor for cannibalism or greed. Real. I've seen its tracks. 3-toed, each toe as long as my forearm. They appear in the snow where nothing has walked. I'm leaving the camp, have to find food, have to eat, but not people, animals. I can catch the deer. I know I can smell them, taste them on the wind. The transformation isn't what I thought. It's not becoming a monster. It's becoming hunger itself, becoming the absence of everything except need. The final page had only 3 words, written large enough to cover the entire sheet. It's inside me. David closed the journal, his heart hammering. The fire crackled and popped. In the forest beyond its light, something moved. He heard it clearly, the crunch of snow under weight, the snap of a branch. He grabbed his mag light, played it across the trees. Nothing, just darkness and snow and the vertical lines of birch trunks. Tyler? His voice sounded small, swallowed by the immensity of the forest. Tyler Dawson? The sound came again, closer now. Not footsteps exactly. More like something dragging itself through the snow. And with it a smell, rotting meat mixed with something chemical, sharp and wrong. The same smell that had been on those deer carcasses. David stood, his hand moving to the bear spray on his belt. 20 years in the forest, he'd only had to use it twice, both times on actual bears. But his fingers closed around the canister anyway. I'm a forest ranger. If you're in trouble, I can help you. A sound came from the darkness, high-pitched but somehow also deep, like Tyler's journal had described. Not an animal sound, not human either. Something that made David's hindbrain scream with ancestral terror, the fear of being prey, of being hunted by something that shouldn't exist. The sound cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was worse. David fed more wood into the fire, building it higher. The flames leaped up, throwing wild shadows across the clearing. His radio was clipped to his shoulder. He grabbed it, pressed transmit. Base, this is Ramirez. I have... He paused, trying to find words that wouldn't make him sound insane. I have a possible wildlife encounter at the Dawson camp, unknown species, requesting immediate backup. Static. Then, copy that, Ramirez. Can you identify the animal? Negative. It's nothing I've seen before. A longer pause. Ranger Ramirez, are you saying you need a wildlife rescue team for an unknown animal encounter? David stared into the darkness beyond his fire. Saw nothing. Heard nothing. But he could feel it out there watching. Waiting. Yes. That's going to take hours to organize, maybe until morning. Can you maintain your position safely? Could he? David looked at his fire, at Tyler's tent, at the journal with its manic warnings. The smart thing would be to descend, to get back to his truck, to call in a full team for first light. But Tyler Dawson was out here, and whatever had made those sounds, whatever had opened those deer from the inside, might find the kid before rescue arrived. Affirmative. I'll hold position. Copy. Backup team mobilizing now. ETA approximately 6 hours. Stay on the radio. 6 hours. David checked his watch. 6:47 p.m. That meant backup wouldn't arrive until after midnight. He had enough wood to keep the fire going, enough cold weather gear to survive. He'd done winter bivouacs before. This was no different. Except it was. Everything about this was different. The hours crawled past. David kept the fire high, burning through his supply of gathered deadfall faster than he should. He couldn't help it. The darkness beyond the firelight felt alive, watching. Several times he heard sounds, that dragging movement through snow, branches snapping, once a sound that might have been breathing but was too loud, too ragged. At 9:23 p.m. he found the first carving. He'd gotten up to gather more firewood, staying within the circle of firelight, when his beam caught the symbol carved into a birch tree at the clearing's edge. The same spiral design from the granite outcropping, cut deep into the pale bark. The wood around it looked diseased, darkened and partially rotted despite the freezing temperature. David circled the camp, his maglite beam searching. Found 6 more symbols. Tyler had carved them into trees, forming a rough circle around the tent, each one showing that same strange decay. 7 locations, Tyler had written, 7 circles for protection. But there were only 7 carvings. Tyler had completed his circle, which meant whatever was out there, it could cross his protective symbols. They didn't work. Or worse, they'd worked exactly as intended, just not the way Tyler thought. They're not protection. They're invitations. At 11:08 p.m., the sounds stopped completely. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noises had been. David stood by his fire, turning slowly, trying to watch all directions at once. His breath came in short gasps that hung in the air like small ghosts. Temperature had dropped to maybe 5 degrees. His exposed skin burned with the cold. Then he heard it. A voice. "Help me." David spun toward the sound. It came from beyond the firelight, deeper in the forest upslope. A man's voice, weak, shaking. "Please, I'm hurt. Can't move." "Tyler?" David called back. "Tyler Dawson?" "Yes." "Please, fell, broke my leg. So cold." Every nerve in David's body screamed danger. This was wrong. The voice sounded strange, flat, like someone reading words phonetically without understanding them. But it could be hypothermia. Shock. Tyler might be dying out there. "Stay where you are, I'm coming." David grabbed his trauma kit, his radio, his mag light, started to step beyond the firelight, then stopped. The voice had come from uphill. But Tyler's tracks in the snow, the ones David had followed to this camp, came from downhill, and there'd been no other tracks leaving the clearing. The snow was undisturbed in the direction of that voice. "Please," the voice called again. "So hungry. Need help." The last word stretched out, the vowel sound going on too long, becoming something that wasn't language anymore. David backed toward the fire, keyed his radio with shaking hands. "Base, I need that backup now. He swallowed hard. "I have a situation." Static crackled. Then a voice, distorted and barely audible. Your position. 3 hours." The radio cut out completely. David shook it, checked the battery indicator. Full charge, but when he tried to transmit again, only dead air answered. "Please," the voice in the forest called. It sounded closer now. Still couldn't see anything beyond the firelight. "I'm hurt. Need help. So hungry." David threw more wood on the fire, remembered his bear spray, pulled it from his belt. Wouldn't do much against a bear from this distance, probably wouldn't do anything against whatever was out there. But holding it made him feel fractionally better. "I know you're not Tyler," he called into the darkness. "I know you're not human." Silence. Then a sound that might have been laughter, high and thin and utterly devoid of humor. The fire flickered, dimmed. David's blood went cold. There was no wind, nothing that should make the flames gutter like that. But they were dying, the light shrinking, darkness pressing closer. He threw on more wood. The fire roared back to life. And in that moment of brightness, he saw it. At the edge of the clearing, just where firelight met darkness, stood a figure. Tall, impossibly tall, maybe 8 feet. Emaciated, ribs visible through ash-gray skin, arms too long, hanging past its knees, ending in hands with fingers like knives. Its legs bent backward at the knee, bird-like. And its face. David's mind refused to process what he saw. The face was human and not human, stretched too long, jaw distended, mouth full of teeth that looked like broken glass. Its eyes were huge and perfectly black, no whites, no iris, just endless dark that seemed to swallow light. But worst of all was the hunger in those eyes. Not just hunger, starvation taken to a metaphysical extreme. Need so profound it had become a force of nature. Once so complete it had eaten everything else and now existed as pure absence, a void shaped like a living thing. The Wendigo. It tilted its head at an angle no human spine could achieve. Opened its mouth, and Tyler Dawson's voice came out. "I'm so hungry, David, so hungry I can't think. Can't remember being anything but hungry. Help me, please." David's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped his mag light. "You're not Tyler." "I was Tyler." The thing stepped closer, moving with an awful jerking grace like a puppet guided by an amateur. 3 days ago, or was it longer? Hard to remember. The hunger ate my memories first, ate everything, until there was only the hunger and this body that isn't mine anymore but is the only body I'll ever have again. Another step. David could see it better now in the firelight. Its skin wasn't gray. It was covered in frost, ice crystals growing from the flesh itself. When it moved, those crystals cracked and reformed. Its breath didn't steam in the cold air, because it wasn't breathing. The chest didn't rise and fall. This thing didn't need air. The book was right, it said, still using Tyler's voice but the inflection all wrong, the pauses in the wrong places. Hunger is the door. I starved myself, followed the instructions, carved the symbols, and it came. The hunger, the transformation, the thing that's always been in the winter woods waiting for someone stupid enough to invite it in. David's fingers tightened on the bear spray canister. "What do you want?" "To feed." The Wendigo's mouth spread wider, impossibly wide, the jaw dislocating with a wet crack. "To satisfy the hunger. But it can't be satisfied. I ate 2 deer, swallowed them whole, felt them inside me, still alive, screaming. But it wasn't enough. It's never enough. The hunger just grows. Grows and grows and grows until there's nothing left in the world but things to eat and the eating that never ends." It took another step. The fire dimmed again. David realized with horror that the thing's presence itself was draining the flames, sucking away the heat and light like it sucked away everything else. "Your backup isn't coming," the Wendigo said. "I ate the radio signals, drank them down like water. So hungry I can taste the electromagnetic spectrum now. Can taste your fear. Smells like copper and smoke." David raised the bear spray, aimed at the thing's face. "Stay back." "That won't work." Tyler's mouth formed words around those glass teeth. "I'm already dead. Tyler Dawson died 3 days ago when the hunger finished eating his soul. I'm what's left. The negative space. The hole in the shape of a human being." It moved fast. One moment it was 15 feet away, the next it was crossing the clearing in 3 massive strides, those backward bending legs propelling it with horrible speed. David squeezed the trigger on the bear spray. Orange chemical fog exploded outward, engulfing the creature. The Wendigo walked through it without slowing. The spray meant nothing to something that didn't need to breathe, didn't have eyes that could sting. David stumbled backward, tripped over a log, fell hard into the snow. The thing loomed over him. Up close it was even worse. He could see the remnants of Tyler's hiking clothes hanging in frozen tatters from its elongated body, could see where human flesh had split and reformed into something else. The face retained fragments of humanity, enough to recognize Tyler Dawson in the bones. But everything soft had been consumed, replaced by this mask of eternal starvation. "I don't want to eat you," it said. And for just a second, something human flickered in those black eyes. "I don't want to eat anything, but I can't stop. The hunger won't let me stop. It's all I am now, all I'll ever be." A hand, Tyler's hand, but with fingers stretched into talons, reached for David's face. He rolled desperately away, came up running. Behind him he heard that awful dragging sound as the Wendigo pursued, moving through the snow with impossible ease despite its unnatural gait. David ran blindly through the forest, his maglite beam bouncing crazily off tree trunks. Behind him, that high-pitched, deep sound rang out again. The Wendigo's cry, halfway between a scream and a moan and something that wasn't in any human vocabulary. He burst through undergrowth, slid down an icy slope, caught himself on a birch sapling before he tumbled over a hidden drop. His radio crackled and he grabbed it desperately. "Ramirez! Come in! Ramirez! I'm here!" He gasped into the radio. "It's real! The Wendigo is real. Tyler Dawson is... he's become..." Static consumed his words. The temperature plummeted further. David could see his breath freezing into ice crystals in the maglite beam. Frost formed on his eyebrows, his stubble. His fingers were going numb inside his gloves. The forest had gone silent again. David spun in a circle, his light searching the darkness. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Where was it? Then he looked up. The Wendigo clung to the trunk of a massive white pine, 20 feet above the ground. Its black eyes fixed on him. It had climbed with spider-like ease, those two long fingers dug into bark. As David watched, it released its grip and fell. He threw himself sideways. The creature hit the ground where he'd been standing, the impact sending up a spray of snow. David scrambled away, his hands and knees plunging through the white powder. The maglite fell from his grip, the beam pointing off at an angle, illuminating nothing useful. "I'm sorry," the Wendigo said from behind him, Tyler's voice cracking with something that might have been genuine emotion. I'm sorry, but I'm so hungry." David's hand closed on a branch, thick as his wrist, broken and sharp at one end. He rolled onto his back, swung the branch with everything he had. It connected with the creature's chest, the sharp end punching through frost-covered skin. The Wendigo looked down at the branch protruding from its torso, tilted its head, reached down and pulled the branch out like removing a splinter. No blood flowed from the wound. Just a darkness that seemed deeper than the absence of light. "I told you," it said sadly. "Already dead?" It fell on him. David felt those glass teeth scrape his face, felt impossible cold radiating from the thing's body. He thrashed, screamed, tried to fight, but the Wendigo was too strong. One hand pinned both his wrists above his head, the other traced down his chest, those knife fingers slicing through his jacket like it wasn't there. "Don't worry," the creature whispered. "You won't die. That's the worst part. The hunger will take you and you'll transform like I did, and you'll spend forever starving, forever eating, forever becoming less and less until there's nothing left but the need." David's vision was going dark at the edges. Not from injury, from cold. The Wendigo's presence was sucking the warmth from his body, hypothermia setting in with supernatural speed. His thoughts began to fragment. In the distance, a sound, an engine, voices shouting. The backup team, finally arriving. But they were too far away. Wouldn't reach him in time. The Wendigo heard them too. Its head snapped up, those black eyes going even wider. More, it breathed. More food. More to eat. Never enough. Never, never, never. It released David, bounded away through the forest toward the voices. David tried to shout a warning, but his throat had frozen closed. He lay in the snow, unable to move, watching his breath crystallize in the air above him. He could hear shouting, screaming. Gunshots, the crack of rifles, the deeper boom of a shotgun. More screaming. Then silence. David forced himself to move. Every muscle shrieked in protest. His core temperature had dropped dangerously low. Hypothermia confusion made his thoughts slow, stupid. But he had to move. Had to survive. Had to warn people. He crawled through the snow toward his dropped maglite, grabbed it with numb fingers, pulled himself upright using a tree trunk, started stumbling downhill toward where he thought the trail should be. The forest spun around him. Trees seemed to move when he wasn't looking, just like Tyler had written. The path disappeared and reappeared. Time stopped meaning anything. He might have walked for minutes or hours. When he finally collapsed, he was on the Brule Lake Trail, halfway back to the trailhead. He lay there, too cold and exhausted to move further. Frost formed on his eyelashes. His extremities had gone from numb to absent. He couldn't feel his fingers or toes at all. In the distance, that sound again, the Wendigo's cry, closer than before. It had finished with the backup team. Now it was coming for him. David closed his eyes, waited for the end. Instead, he heard voices, real voices, human, panicked. Hands grabbed him, lifted him. Someone was saying his name over and over. He tried to warn them, tried to say the Wendigo was coming, but his jaw wouldn't work. They carried him, put him in something warm. A truck, he realized, distantly. The heater was running. Someone wrapped him in blankets. His body began to shake uncontrollably as feeling returned, the pain excruciating. Found 3 others. Someone was saying, dead, torn apart. Jesus Christ, what could do that? Animal attack. Another voice. Bear, maybe. That wasn't any goddamn bear. David forced his eyes open, saw paramedics working on him, saw the inside of an ambulance. Beyond the open rear doors, the forest stood dark and still, watching, waiting. One of the paramedics leaned over him. "Sir, can you hear me? You're going to be okay. We got you. You're safe." David tried to speak, managed only a croak. The paramedic leaned closer. David found his voice. "Not safe, never safe. It's still out there, still hungry." The paramedic glanced at his partner. "He's delirious, severe hypothermia. Let's get him to Ely Regional Hospital, now." The ambulance doors slammed shut. The engine roared to life. As they pulled away from the trailhead, David caught one last glimpse of the forest through the rear window. In the darkness between the trees, something tall and impossibly thin stood watching. Its black eyes caught the ambulance lights, reflected them back like an animal's. Its mouth stretched wide in something that might have been a smile. Then the forest swallowed it, and it was gone. The Ely Regional Hospital kept David for 3 days. Frostbite had claimed parts of 3 fingers on his right hand and all of his left pinky. They had to amputate. Hypothermia had damaged his cardiovascular system. He'd need months of recovery. The Forest Service put him on administrative leave. There'd be an investigation into what happened. 3 rangers from the backup team were dead, their bodies so badly mutilated that closed casket funerals were the only option. Tyler Dawson remained officially missing, his camp discovered, but no sign of the young man himself. David knew they'd never find Tyler. Tyler Dawson didn't exist anymore. There was only the Wendigo, wandering the Superior National Forest, eternally starving, eternally hunting. He tried to tell them, tried to explain what he'd seen, but the doctors attributed his story to hypothermic hallucinations. The rangers who'd found him said he'd been nearly frozen to death, confused and delirious. Easy to see things that weren't there. Easy to create monsters when the mind was failing. On the 4th day, they let him have visitors. His sister came up from Minneapolis, cried when she saw his bandaged hands. She brought him a newspaper, the Duluth Herald, dated November 23, 2009. The front page story was about the deaths in Superior National Forest. Animal attack, the official report claimed. Possibly a rogue bear or pack of wolves. The forest would be closed to hikers until further notice. Buried in the bottom right corner was a smaller article. Hunter reports strange encounters near boundary waters. David read it with growing dread. 2 deer found mutilated, opened from the inside. Strange tracks in the snow, 3-toed and impossibly large. A sound at night that wasn't any known animal. 1 hunter missing. It was spreading. Hunting. Feeding. The Wendigo was still out there. When his sister left, David sat alone in his hospital room and stared at the newspaper until the words blurred. He thought about Tyler Dawson's journal, about the book the kid had found near Caribou Lake, grimoire of old magic and older hunger, instructions for transformation, for invitation, 7 symbols, 7 circles, 7 doors the ancient thing could use to cross from wherever it waited into the world of flesh and blood and meat. Tyler had carved 7 symbols, opened 7 doors, let something through that should have stayed locked away in the winter darkness of Aboriginal nightmares. David thought about those 3 rangers torn apart before they'd even understood what they faced. Thought about other hikers, other hunters, other people who'd wander into Superior National Forest not knowing the Wendigo was there, waiting, hungry, always hungry. He picked up the phone beside his hospital bed, called the district supervisor. The conversation was short, clinical. David quit the Forest Service effective immediately. Medical retirement. He couldn't go back out there, couldn't face that thing again. But even as he hung up, he knew it didn't matter. The Wendigo would spread, would hunt, would transform others the way it had transformed Tyler, through hunger, through invitation, through the dark ancient magic that humans had always known existed but pretended didn't. Winter was coming, truly coming, and with it, the hunger that walks. David sat in his hospital room and stared at his bandaged hands. Outside the window, the first real snow of the season was starting to fall, fat flakes drifting down in the darkness, covering everything in white. Beautiful, pristine, pure. Beneath that snow, Superior National Forest waited. Endless acres of boreal wilderness, thousands of trees, hundreds of lakes, dozens of trails. And somewhere in that vastness, a thing that had once been Tyler Dawson stood motionless in the cold, not breathing, not blinking, just watching, waiting, starving, always starving. The hunger would never end, would never be satisfied. It would hunt until there was nothing left to eat, and then it would hunt the emptiness itself. David knew he should warn people, should tell the truth no matter who believed him, but who would listen? He'd tried to tell the authorities. They'd dismissed it as hypothermia-induced delusions. He'd told the doctors. They'd suggested psychiatric evaluation. The truth was too horrible, too impossible. Easier to believe in rogue bears and pack-hunting wolves than in the Wendigo. Easier to rationalize the mutilated deer, the missing hikers, the sounds in the darkness. Easier to die ignorant than live with the knowledge of what hunted in the winter woods. David closed his eyes. Behind his lids, he saw those black eyes again. Saw Tyler Dawson's face stretched over something that wasn't human. Heard that voice saying, "I'm so hungry," over and over. The words losing meaning, becoming just sound, becoming hunger itself vocalized. The newspaper lay on his lap, already creasing where his bandaged hands had gripped it too tightly. 2 deer found mutilated. Strange tracks. 1 hunter missing. It was just beginning. Beyond his hospital window, snow continued to fall, covering the roads, the parking lot, the trees at the forest's edge. By morning, everything would be white, clean, new. But underneath, the hunger waited. Patient, immortal, inevitable. David Ramirez had spent 20 years as a forest ranger, had believed the wilderness could be understood, could be managed, could be kept safe through knowledge and preparation. He'd been wrong. Some things couldn't be understood, couldn't be managed, couldn't be kept at bay with radios and GPS units and protocols. Some things were older than civilization, older than humanity, older than hunger itself, because they were hunger in its purest and most ancient form, the Wendigo. And it was still out there, still hungry, still hunting, always. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The blood on the trail marker wasn't fresh, but it wasn't old either. Somewhere in that impossible middle ground that made David Ramirez's 23 years of experience feel suddenly worthless. He crouched beside the wooden post, his knees protesting the movement in that way they'd started doing lately, reminding him he wasn't the 30-year-old ranger who'd first walked these mountains. The blood had soaked into the wood grain, dark and viscous, more of it than a simple nosebleed or scraped hand would produce. David pulled out his radio, thumb hovering over the call button, then stopped. Something felt wrong about calling this in. Not wrong in a procedural sense, a potential injury on the Iceberg Lake Trail definitely warranted backup. Wrong in a deeper way, the kind of instinct that had kept him alive through 2 decades of SAR operations in some of the most unforgiving terrain in North America. The trail marker pointed northeast toward the lake, exactly where Tyler Dawson's itinerary said he'd be camping. 26 years old, experienced backpacker from Seattle, solo trip, check-in missed by 36 hours. Standard missing person case. David had worked hundreds of them. Most ended with sheepish hikers who'd lost track of time or gotten turned around. Some ended with bodies. All of them followed patterns David knew by heart. This one already felt different. He stood, scanning the surrounding forest with the methodical precision that had become second nature. Lodgepole pines stretched toward the September sky, their shadows lengthening as afternoon crept toward evening. The wind carried the smell of pine needles and stone, clean and sharp. Normal. Everything looked exactly as it should, except for the silence. David had spent enough time in these mountains to know their rhythms. The birds should be active at this hour, squirrels chattering, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Instead, nothing moved. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. He keyed his radio. Ranger Ramirez to base. I'm at mile marker 4 on Iceberg Lake Trail. Found possible blood evidence. Continuing search for Dawson. Over. Static crackled back, then Jennifer's voice, distant and pixelated. Copy that, David. Do you need backup? Over. Negative for now. Trail conditions are good, plenty of daylight left. I'll check in again at 1800. Over. Roger. Be careful up there. Weather Service is predicting temperature drop tonight. Over and out. David clipped the radio back to his belt and adjusted his pack. 62 pounds of gear. Emergency medical supplies, rope flares, survival blanket, water purification tablets, MREs, his Glock 22 in its holster. Everything by the book. Everything he'd carried 1,000 times before. He moved up the trail, his boots finding purchase on the packed earth with automatic precision. The path wound through dense forest, climbing steadily. At this elevation, just over 6,000 feet, the air thinned noticeably, but David's breathing remained steady. He'd been born in these mountains, metaphorically speaking. The glacier backcountry had shaped him, taught him everything that mattered. The next marker showed more blood. Fresh enough to be tacky to the touch, smeared across the wood in a pattern that suggested someone had grabbed it for support. Or been grabbed. David photographed it with his phone, noting the GPS coordinates. 6,247 feet elevation. The lake was still another 2 miles and 1,500 vertical feet ahead. That's when he saw the first track. It was pressed deep into the soft earth beside the trail, where yesterday's rain had left the ground receptive. At first glance, it looked human, roughly the right size and shape. But the proportions were wrong. Too long, too narrow. The toe impressions extended forward in a way that suggested an unnatural gait, and the depth of the print indicated something far heavier than any human hiker. David had tracked bears, mountain lions, wolves. He'd seen deformities, unusual tracks, overlapping prints that created optical illusions. This was none of those things. He took more photographs, placed his hand next to the track for scale. His fingers, thick and scarred from decades of outdoor work, looked small beside it. The track measured 14 inches from heel to toe. Protocol said document everything, maintain objectivity, don't jump to conclusions. David had written those protocols himself, helped train dozens of rangers in evidence collection and rational analysis of wilderness incidents. He'd given lectures on avoiding cognitive bias, on seeing what's actually there rather than what fear or exhaustion might suggest. The track was real, the measurements were exact, and every instinct David had developed over 23 years was screaming at him to turn around. He didn't. Tyler Dawson was still missing. That remained the primary objective, regardless of unusual evidence. David marked the location on his GPS, took additional photographs from multiple angles, then continued up the trail. The temperature dropped noticeably as he climbed higher. What had been a mild September afternoon felt suddenly more like November, the kind of cold that came with storms. But the sky remained clear, crystalline blue between the pine branches. No meteorological reason for the chill that raised bumps along David's forearms. He passed another marker. More blood, but also something else. Scratches in the wood that looked almost like writing. Not English. Nothing David recognized. Symbols or patterns that might be Native American in origin, though he'd worked with Blackfeet Rangers for years and had never seen anything like this. The marks were deep, carved with something sharp, recent enough that pale wood showed through the weathered exterior. David's radio crackled. "Kez, this is base, do you?" Static swallowed the transmission. He adjusted the frequency, checked the battery. Full charge, signal strength good. Should have clear communication all the way to the lake. "Base, this is Ramirez, you're breaking up. Repeat, over." Nothing but white noise. He tried twice more, then clipped the radio back to his belt. Not unprecedented. The mountains created dead zones, interference patterns. But David had been on this exact trail dozens of times and never had communication issues at this location. The trail steepened, switchbacking through a section of loose scree. David's boot slipped twice, unusual for him. His balance felt off, as if the mountain itself was tilting beneath him. He stopped at a relatively flat section, pulled out his compass for a bearing check. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle. David tapped the casing, held it level, still spinning. He pulled out his backup compass. Quality brass instrument, not some cheap plastic toy. Same result. Both needles rotating slowly, never quite pointing in any consistent direction. His GPS still showed coordinates, elevation, trail position, but the compass failure added to the growing list of anomalies that David's rational mind was struggling to explain. The sun was lower now, shadows stretching long and cold across the trail. David checked his watch, 16:47. He'd been hiking for over 2 hours, should be close to Iceberg Lake. But the forest around him looked wrong, the trees too dense, the undergrowth too thick. This section of trail should be more open, with clear views of the surrounding peaks. He pulled out his map, oriented himself by elevation and trail markers. According to every indicator, he was exactly where he should be. But his eyes told him something different. That's when he heard the voice. Help. Distant, thin, carried on wind that wasn't blowing. Male voice. Could be Dawson. David moved toward the sound, off trail now, pushing through pine branches that scratched at his jacket. "Tyler Dawson, Park Service, call out again." "Help me." Closer now, just ahead, but also somehow behind him and to the left, as if the voice was coming from multiple directions simultaneously. David's hand moved to his holster, unsnapping it. Not drawing, no threat yet, but ready. 23 years of experience warred with instincts that felt ancient, primal. Every rational part of his brain said this was a hiker in distress, disoriented, possibly injured. But that deeper part, the part that had kept humans alive in dark forests for 10,000 years, was screaming warnings. He broke through the trees into a small clearing. Tyler Dawson stood in the center, facing away from David. Young, athletic build, wearing the REI pack and North Face jacket described in his file, completely still, posture rigid. "Tyler, I'm Ranger David Ramirez. Are you injured?" No response, no movement. David circled slowly, hand still on his holster. "Tyler, I need you to respond. Can you hear me?" When he could finally see Dawson's profile, David's breath caught. The young man's eyes were open but unseeing, mouth slack. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor that looked wrong even in the fading light. But he was standing, upright, balanced. "Tyler." The smell hit David then. Rotten copper, meat gone bad, something chemical underneath. His eyes watered, stomach clenching. He'd smelled death before, plenty of times. This was different. This was death mixed with something else, something that didn't belong in the natural world. He pulled out his flashlight, shined it directly on Dawson's face. The eyes didn't react, didn't blink. But in the beam's illumination, David could see them moving. Not the eyes themselves, but something beneath the surface, something crawling under the skin, creating patterns of motion that made David's gorge rise. Jesus Christ. The words came out as a whisper. Tyler Dawson's mouth opened, not speaking, just opening wider and wider, jaw extending past any human range of motion. And from that impossibly stretched mouth came a sound, clicking, chittering, like 1,000 insects trying to form words. David drew his weapon, trained its center mass. "Stay where you are. Don't move." The thing wearing Tyler Dawson smiled, its head tilted at an angle that would snap a human neck, studying David with those writhing eyes. Then it moved. Fast. Too fast. One moment standing 15 feet away, the next right in front of David, close enough that he could smell its breath, fish and gangrene and winter ice. David fired, 3 rounds center mass, textbook shooting. The impacts punched through what should have been Dawson's chest, created exit wounds that wept something black and viscous. It didn't even slow down. A hand, pale, too thin, nails black and curved, wrapped around David's throat and lifted him off his feet. He fired twice more, point blank into the thing's face. The bullets tore through without effect, leaving holes that revealed not bone or brain, but emptiness, a void that seemed to swallow light. David's boots kicked uselessly. His fingers clawed at the hand strangling him, found flesh cold as January stone. His vision started to gray at the edges, lungs burning. 23 years of training, and he was about to die in these mountains he thought he knew. The creature leaned close, its ruined face inches from his own. When it spoke, the voice was Tyler Dawson's, but layered with others. Dozens of voices speaking in unison, including some David recognized from missing persons cases going back years. "So hungry," it whispered. "Always so hungry. But you taste different. You taste like these mountains. Maybe you'll last longer." It released him. David dropped to his knees, gasping, weapon fallen somewhere in the pine needles. He tried to stand, legs refusing to cooperate. The creature watched him struggle, head tilted in that wrong angle, that terrible smile never faltering. Then it was gone. Not walking away, just gone, as if it had never been there at all. David knelt in the clearing as darkness gathered, his throat bruised and aching, his service weapon somewhere in the undergrowth. Everything he thought he knew about these mountains, about wilderness search and rescue, about the natural world itself, all of it felt like a child's story now, a comfortable fiction that had just been violently torn away. He found his gun after several minutes of searching, hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. The Glock held 3 rounds. He'd fired 5. The magazine showed 11 remaining. Impossible, but there it was. His radio sparked to life, sudden and clear. "Ramirez, this is base. What's your status? You missed your check-in. Over." David looked at his watch. 19:23. Somehow, 3 hours had passed. He had no memory of that time, no sense of where it had gone. The clearing around him was empty, but pine needles showed disturbance, as if something large had been dragged through them. He keyed the radio, voice rough. "Base, this is Ramirez. I found evidence of Dawson. Situation is complicated. Requesting immediate backup and medical evac. Over." "Copy that. What's your position?" "Over." David checked his GPS. The coordinates made no sense. According to the device, he was 2 miles northwest of Iceberg Lake, in an area he knew to be impassable terrain. But the map didn't lie. Neither did the GPS satellites orbiting overhead. "I'm at..." He rattled off the coordinates, heard the confusion in Jennifer's response. "David, those coordinates put you in the Grinnell Glacier drainage. That's not on your search route. Are you injured?" "Over." "Negative on injuries, but something's wrong up here. Very wrong. I need backup before dark." "Over." Silence for several seconds. Then, "Roger, Chopper's already scrambled for another call, but I've got Frank and Sarah heading your way. ETA 90 minutes. Can you make it to a clearing for extraction?" "Over." David looked at the sky, what little he could see through the canopy. Stars were appearing hard and cold. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees, his breath fogging now. "I'll do my best." "Base, There's something you need to know. Dawson is... Static cut him off. He tried again, got nothing but white noise. The radio was working, but something was interfering with transmission. Or something didn't want him talking to base. He started moving, picking a direction that felt right based on instinct rather than instruments. His GPS still showed those impossible coordinates, compass still spinning uselessly. But David had navigated these mountains before GPS existed, before digital anything. He knew how to read the stars, the slope of the land, the way water flowed downhill. Except nothing felt right. The stars were in wrong positions, not dramatically but subtly off, as if he was looking at a sky that was almost but not quite his own. The slope seemed to shift as he walked, uphill becoming downhill without warning. Water sounds came from directions that didn't match the terrain. He'd been in whiteout conditions, in midnight darkness, in situations where all technological navigation failed. But he'd always trusted his own senses, his accumulated knowledge of these mountains. Now even that was being taken away. The forest grew denser as he walked, trees pressing close. David had to use his flashlight, the beam cutting through darkness that felt physical, resistant. In the light's edge, he caught glimpses of movement, things that might be animals or might be something else, shapes that didn't quite resolve into recognizable forms. He heard voices, sometimes Tyler Dawson calling for help, sometimes his own voice, calling back to himself. Once his ex-wife Maria, dead 6 years now, speaking in Spanish the way she used to when she was angry. The voices never came from any consistent direction, sometimes near, sometimes impossibly distant. David kept moving, hand on his weapon, flashlight sweeping back and forth. His throat ached where he'd been grabbed, bruises already forming. Physical proof that what happened had been real, not hallucination or exhaustion. A shape loomed out of the darkness, a cabin, weathered logs and a corrugated metal roof. It shouldn't be here. David knew every structure in this section of the park, every maintained building and historical ruin. There was nothing marked on any map at these coordinates. The door hung open, interior black as a cave mouth. David's flashlight beam penetrated only a few feet before being swallowed by darkness that seemed to actively resist illumination. Common sense said, "Don't go inside." His training said, "Wait for backup, maintain safe position." But the temperature was still dropping, already below freezing, and David's gear was rated for September conditions, not November. His radio remained dead, and somewhere in the darkness, that thing that had worn Tyler Dawson's face was still out there. He checked his weapon, 11 rounds, and entered the cabin. The interior smelled of age and something else, something organic and wrong. David's flashlight revealed a single room, maybe 20 by 20 feet. A wood stove in one corner, cold and rusted. A wooden table and 2 chairs. Shelves along one wall holding mason jars filled with substances David didn't want to identify. And on the far wall, scratched deep into the logs, symbols. The same symbols he'd seen on the trail markers. David moved closer, running his flashlight over the carvings. They covered the entire wall, overlapping, some older than others. Not random. There was pattern here, structure. Some of the symbols looked vaguely Native American, others European, still others from traditions David didn't recognize. But one recurring motif appeared again and again, a thin figure with antlers, mouth open in eternal hunger. Wendigo. The word surfaced from some half-forgotten conversation with a Blackfeet ranger years ago. Spirits of starvation and greed, cannibalistic entities that haunted the northern forests. David had filed it away with other cultural stories, folklore that had no place in his rational, evidence-based approach to wilderness management. The stories were real. Standing in that cabin, looking at symbols carved by desperate or terrified hands over what might be decades, David had to accept that truth. The Wendigo was real, and it was hunting these mountains. His radio crackled. Not words, but something that might have been words once, distorted and layered until they became pure noise, painful to hear. David turned it off, the silence afterward almost worse than the static. A sound from outside. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, circling the cabin. David moved away from the wall of symbols, positioning himself where he could see both the door and the single window. His flashlight beam trembled slightly, not from fear, he told himself, though that would have been honest. The footsteps stopped at the door. David raised his weapon, centered it on the opening. His finger found the trigger guard, ready but not committed. 23 years of training screamed at him to announce himself, give verbal warnings. But what good were procedures against something that shouldn't exist? A figure stepped into the doorway, silhouetted against the starlight. Human-shaped but wrong in proportions, too tall and too thin. David's flashlight caught it full in the face. Not Tyler Dawson this time. An older woman, maybe 60, wearing hiking clothes from decades past, faded denim and a windbreaker with a brand David vaguely recognized from the 80s. Her face was sunken, skin pulled tight over skull, eyes filmed with white. But she was moving, standing, those dead eyes somehow tracking David's position. "Ranger," the voice rattled from a throat that should have been desiccated. "You shouldn't be here, this is sacred ground. Cursed ground. Same thing, really." David kept his weapon trained on her, though bullets had done nothing to the Dawson thing. "Who are you?" "Margaret Chen. Disappeared July 1987. Or maybe I didn't disappear. Maybe I just stayed too long, listened too close to the voices in the wind." She smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "It gets hungry, you know. The forest, the old thing that lived here before the trees, before the glaciers. It sleeps mostly, dreams cold dreams. But sometimes it wakes. Sometimes it needs to feed." "Where's Tyler Dawson? The real Tyler Dawson?" Margaret's head tilted, that same wrong angle David had seen before. "Gone. Consumed. Part of the mountain now like all the others. Like I am. We're just echoes. Puppets. The thing wears us when it needs to interact with your world. But mostly it just hungers." David's mind raced, trying to integrate this information into some framework that made sense. "The symbols on the wall, what are they?" "Warnings, wards, prayers." Margaret gestured with a hand that had too many joints. "Doesn't matter. Nothing keeps it out when it decides to feed. The indigenous people knew. That's why they avoided these particular valleys. Why certain peaks were forbidden. Your maps are wrong, Ranger. This whole section of the park, it's not really part of your world anymore. Hasn't been for a long time." "That's not possible. You've seen it. You felt its hands on your throat." Margaret moved closer, each step accompanied by a sound like breaking sticks. "You know what's real now. The question is what you do with that knowledge. Do you run? Try to forget? Or do you stay and become part of the feast?" David's weapon hand steadied. Whatever this thing was, it was toying with him, trying to break his will before taking his body. He'd seen that pattern in predators, the playing with prey before the kill. But he was still armed, still mobile, still thinking, not prey yet. "I'm walking out of here, and I'm taking anyone who can be saved." Margaret laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "There's no one left to save, but you're welcome to try. Makes the hunt more interesting." She lunged. David fired twice, center mass, watching the bullets punch through her chest with wet impacts. She didn't slow. Her hand, those too many jointed fingers, reached for his face. David dropped, rolled, came up moving toward the door. Margaret spun with inhuman speed, blocking his path. He fired again, this time at her knee. The joint exploded, bone and black ichor spraying. Margaret stumbled but didn't fall. David didn't wait. He dove through the window, glass and old wood shattering around him. He hit the ground rolling, came up running, flashlight forgotten in the cabin. Behind him, Margaret's laughter followed, along with footsteps that shouldn't be possible from someone with a destroyed knee. "Run, Ranger, run, and maybe you'll make it to dawn." Though probably not. David ran. No pretense at navigation now. No attempt to maintain bearings. Pure flight through darkness barely relieved by starlight. Tree branches whipped at his face. Roots grabbed at his boots. His breath came in ragged gasps, the altitude finally catching up with decades of accumulated damage in his lungs. He ran until his legs gave out, collapsing against the base of a massive pine. His watch read 22:47. His GPS was dead, screen cracked. His radio remained silent. 8 rounds left in his weapon, for all the good they do. The forest around him was utterly still. No wind, no animal sounds, not even the creak of settling trees. Just silence, oppressive and expectant. Then, carried on air that wasn't moving, he heard singing. Native voices harmonizing in a language he didn't recognize. Not threatening, mournful almost. A death song, maybe, or a warning that came centuries too late. David closed his eyes, focused on breathing. Panic was the enemy. Panic got people killed in the wilderness more surely than any predator. He still had water, emergency supplies, a weapon. He could survive until dawn, until the helicopter came looking. He just had to maintain, stay rational, not let fear override his training. The singing stopped. In its place, a voice he recognized. His own voice, calling from somewhere in the darkness. "Help! Someone help me! I'm hurt!" David's mouth was closed. He wasn't speaking. But his own voice continued, desperate and pleading. "Please, I think my leg's broken. I can see lights. Please help." Another voice joined in. Jennifer from base, panicked. "David, where are you? We've got your GPS signal, but it keeps jumping. Frank and Sarah are at your last coordinates, but there's nothing there." Then Frank's voice. "Jesus Christ, what is that thing?" Sarah screaming. Gunshots, distant and rapid. Silence. David remained perfectly still, weapon ready, every muscle tensed. The voices were lies, designed to provoke response, to make him reveal his position. Standard predator tactics, elevated to supernatural efficiency. His own voice called again, closer now. "Marco?" Despite everything, despite knowing it was a trap, David almost responded. The old childhood game, calling out in darkness, trusting that someone would answer. Polo. But he bit down on the word, kept silent. Footsteps approached. Multiple sets from multiple directions. David could see nothing in the darkness. His flashlight lost in the cabin, moon not yet risen. But he could hear them circling, closing in. A figure emerged from the trees, then another. And another. 6 in total, all wearing the faces of people David had searched for over the years. Some recently missing, others from cases going back to his first season as a ranger. All dead, all animated by something that spoke through them in chorus. "You're alone now," they said in perfect unison, their voices blending into something inhuman. "No backup coming, no rescue. Just you and us and the mountain. It's hungry, Ranger Ramirez. It's always hungry, but we can end this quickly if you let us. No more running, no more fear, just sleep." David raised his weapon, knowing it was futile but refusing to give up. "Fuck you." They moved. All 6 at once, converging from different angles. David fired, emptying his magazine in controlled pairs, each shot center mass, textbook shooting. The muzzle flashes lit the forest in strobe-like bursts, revealing faces twisted in hungry smiles, hands reaching, mouths opening too wide. Click. Empty. David dropped the gun, yanked his knife from its sheath. 8 inches of carbon steel, sharp enough to split hairs, utterly inadequate against what was coming. The first one reached him. A young man David had searched for 3 years ago, found dead from exposure after a week lost in the backcountry. Its hands grabbed David's jacket, pulled him close. The smell of decay was overwhelming, making his eyes water. David slammed the knife into its chest, felt the blade sink through flesh and scrape against something hard underneath. The thing didn't react, just pulled him closer, mouth opening, that black void behind its teeth expanding. Then light, sudden and brilliant, flooding the forest like daylight. A helicopter spotlight, National Park Service chopper descending between the trees in a maneuver that should have been impossible. Rotor wash blasting pine needles and debris everywhere. The things wearing human faces recoiled, their borrowed flesh blistering and smoking in the light. They released David, stumbling backward, making sounds that might have been pain or rage or both. David didn't hesitate. He ran toward the light, toward the helicopter settling into a clearing he hadn't known was there. Strong hands grabbed him, pulled him into the chopper. Jennifer's face, real this time, concerned and terrified. "Go! Go! Go!" she was shouting to the pilot. The helicopter lifted, rotors screaming. Through the open door, David watched the figures below. 6 decomposing bodies standing in the rotor wash, faces upturned. As the chopper gained altitude, they moved in perfect synchronization, raising their arms toward the departing aircraft, not reaching, not threatening, waving goodbye. Then the forest swallowed them, and they were gone. David sat in the helicopter's jump seat, emergency blanket around his shoulders, paramedic checking his vitals. Real people, real equipment, real world reasserting itself. But his throat still ached from inhuman fingers. His knife was still covered in black ichor, and when he closed his eyes, he could still see that void behind Tyler Dawson's teeth, still hear the chorus of voices promising endless hunger. "What the hell happened up there?" Jennifer was asking, her hand on his shoulder grounding him. "We lost contact for 4 hours. Your GPS was showing impossible locations. Frank and Sarah found your packet coordinates that don't match any trail. They found blood, David. A lot of blood. And symbols carved into trees." David opened his mouth to explain, to tell her about the Wendigo and the cabin and the things wearing human faces. But the words wouldn't come. Because how do you explain that the mountains you've protected for 23 years are built on something ancient and hungry? How do you tell people that the maps are lies? That whole sections of the park aren't part of the world they think they know? "I found evidence of Dawson," he said finally. "He's gone. Not lost. Gone. And there are others. Maybe dozens. The forest took them." Jennifer's expression was carefully neutral, the way people look when they're worried about your mental state. "We'll send a full team up at dawn. Document everything, find out what happened." "Don't." David grabbed her wrist, suddenly urgent. "Don't send anyone back there. That section needs to be closed, permanently. Make up a reason, rockslide danger, bear activity, whatever. But don't let anyone else go up there." "David, we can't just—" "Yes, we can. Trust me. Please." He met her eyes, let her see the truth in his face. "There are things in these mountains that aren't in any manual, things that shouldn't exist but do. And they're hungry, Jennifer, they're always hungry." The helicopter banked, beginning its descent toward park headquarters. Through the window, David could see the familiar lights of the ranger station, the parking lot, the maintenance building. Normal world, rational world. But when he looked back toward the mountains, toward Glacier National Park, spreading dark and vast under the stars, he saw something else, shadows moving between the peaks, patterns in the tree line that might be natural or might be something watching, waiting. The park looked the same, but David knew differently now. Knew that beneath the visitor centers and maintained trails, beneath the official boundaries and GPS coordinates, something older persisted. Something that had been here before humans named these mountains, before glaciers carved these valleys. Something that would be here long after the last ranger logged out and the park was forgotten. He'd spent 23 years protecting this land and the people who visited it. Now he knew the truth. It wasn't the people who needed protection from the wilderness. It was the wilderness that tolerated human presence, allowed them to think they understood, to believe their maps and compasses actually meant something. The helicopter touched down. Medical personnel rushed forward. David let them guide him toward the ambulance, going through the motions of protocol and procedure. But part of him was still in those dark mountains, still running, still hearing voices call his name in tones that promised everything and nothing. He'd survived. That was more than Tyler Dawson could say, more than Margaret Chen or the others. But survival came with knowledge, and knowledge had a weight that David wasn't sure he could carry. Because next spring, when the snow melted and tourists returned, when hikers headed up Iceberg Lake Trail with their GPS devices and cell phones and complete confidence in their own safety, David would know what was watching them from the shadows between the trees. He'd know and he wouldn't be able to tell them. He wouldn't. Who would believe him? Who would accept that their maps were wrong, that the mountains held pockets of something other? Better to let them hike in ignorance, trust in their equipment, believe the wilderness could be managed and understood. Better that than trying to explain that some hungers never die, that some territories never truly belong to humans, that some things in the dark places of the world are exactly as terrible as ancient stories warned. David looked back one last time before they closed the ambulance doors. The mountain stood black against the star-filled sky, beautiful and deadly and utterly indifferent to human presence. Somewhere up there, in a cabin that wouldn't be on any map, symbols were carved into wood by desperate hands. Somewhere up there, the Wendigo waited, patient and eternal, for the next hiker who strayed too far from maintained trails. And David would have to live with that knowledge, unable to save them, unable to stop it. All he could do was suggest trail closures, recommend boundary changes, and pray that nobody else wandered into that section of the park where the rules of the natural world dissolved into something much older and infinitely more hungry. The ambulance doors closed. Through the small window, David watched the mountains disappear, but he could still feel them, still sense that vast presence stretching across the landscape. The Wendigo had let him go, had let the helicopter extract him. Not mercy, just patience. It had fed recently on Tyler Dawson and others. It could wait for the next meal, secure in the knowledge that humans would always venture into dark places, always trust their technology over ancient warnings. David closed his eyes and tried not to think about next season, next year, the next search and rescue call that would come in from the Iceberg Lake Trail. Tried not to imagine standing in a briefing room, looking at photographs of a missing hiker, knowing exactly where they'd gone and what had taken them. 23 years of experience and none of it mattered. The mountains had shown him truth, and truth was heavier than any pack he'd ever carried. Outside, the autumn wind whispered through the pines, carrying voices only he could hear now, promising that the forest remembered, that the hunger never slept, that some territories would never truly belong to those who tried to map them. David shivered beneath his emergency blanket and waited for dawn, knowing that daylight would change nothing, that the darkness in those mountains existed beyond mere absence of light. The Wendigo was patient. It would wait, and eventually, inevitably, someone else would stray from the marked trails into regions where compasses spun uselessly and GPS coordinates lied. And David would know, would remember, would be unable to stop it. That was the real horror, not what he'd seen, but what he'd learned. That the wilderness only pretended to be understood, that the maps were comfortable fictions, and that beneath the veneer of civilization and technology, older powers persisted, patient and hungry, and utterly indifferent to human laws. He'd survived. But survival meant carrying that knowledge forward, meant living with the understanding that his life's work, protecting this park and its visitors, had been built on illusions. The park couldn't be protected because it had never truly been tamed. The visitors couldn't be kept safe because the danger was woven into the landscape itself. All he could do was remember and warn whoever would listen, and hope that next time the hunger struck, it would be quick. The ambulance pulled away from the ranger station, heading toward the hospital in Kalispell. David kept his eyes closed and tried not to hear the wind, tried not to recognize the voices it carried, tried not to understand the words they whispered in languages that predated human speech. But he heard them anyway, would always hear them now. The mountains remembered. The Wendigo waited. And somewhere in the vast darkness of Glacier National Park, in places that existed on no map and answered to no authority, ancient hungers stirred and dreamed cold dreams of the meals yet to come. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The tree bark had been stripped in perfect spirals for 40 feet up the trunk, something Daniel Kowalski knew was anatomically impossible for any animal in the North Cascades to accomplish. He stood at Thunder Creek Trail's mile marker 7, staring at the Douglas fir while his mind cataloged and rejected explanations. Bears stripped bark vertically, following the cambium layer. Mountain goats scraped horizontally. Porcupines left tooth marks. This was neither. The spiral pattern was precise, mathematical, like someone had used a lathe on living wood. 40 feet up. The lowest branch was at 60. Daniel set down his pack and pulled out his Garmin eTrex GPS, noting the coordinates. 48.6719 degree N, 121.0547 degree W, elevation 3,147 feet. He'd worked as a ranger in North Cascades National Park for 6 years, the last 3 assigned to the Thunder Creek drainage. He knew these woods the way other people knew their childhood homes. This tree had been fined 2 weeks ago during his last patrol. The October air carried that particular crystalline quality that preceded the first serious snowfall, clean and thin in his lungs. He photographed the tree from multiple angles with his department-issued Nikon, then took bark samples, sealing them in evidence bags with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. Years of graduate work in forestry before the recession had driven him into public service had trained him to observe, document, hypothesize. The scientific method was a bulwark against uncertainty. The bark samples felt wrong in his hands. Too light. He held one up to the slanting afternoon sun and saw it had been hollowed from the inside. The wood pulp consumed entirely, leaving only the outer shell. Like something had drunk the tree. Daniel's radio crackled, normal static not worth noting except that his mind seized on the familiar sound like a lifeline to the rational world. He clipped it back to his belt without checking in. He had 3 more hours before he needed to report to Marble Mount Station. He found the first sign of Ashley Ningian 20 yards further up the trail. Her North Face jacket hung from a branch at eye level, neatly draped as if placed there deliberately. Daniel recognized it immediately. Distinctive teal color, yellow reflective strips. The same one she'd been wearing in the photo her sister had showed him 3 days ago when she'd filed the missing person report. Ashley had been hiking alone, hadn't checked in with anyone for 5 days, and her car was still parked at the Thunder Creek trailhead, with her keys in the wheel well where she apparently always left them. Solo hiker, experienced, prepared, the sister had said, voice tight with the kind of controlled panic that came from knowing something was wrong but having no proof yet. She does this trail twice a year. She knows it. Daniel put on latex gloves before touching the jacket. The fabric was clean. No tears, no blood, no signs of struggle. He checked the pockets. Empty, except for a Cliff Bar wrapper and a folded topo map. The map showed Thunder Creek Trail with several spots marked in red pen. Mile 4, Mile 7, Mile 12, Mile 15. He was at Mile 7, the same location as the stripped tree. He looked back at the spiral-carved Douglas fir, then at the jacket hanging in perfect display. The coincidence made his jaw tighten. Daniel didn't believe in coincidences, but he believed in patterns, and patterns required investigation. The temperature dropped as he continued up the trail, a plunge of at least 10 degrees that his body registered even though his thermometer showed no change. His breath clouded thick and immediate. The Douglas firs gave way to mountain hemlock, their dark branches heavy with silence. No bird calls. No squirrel chatter. The absence of sound was absolute in a way that wilderness never was, even in winter. At Mile 12, he found the second marked location. A cairn had been built in the center of the trail, stones stacked in a spiral pattern that made his stomach clench with recognition. Too precise, too deliberate, and beside it, scratched into the dirt in letters 2 feet high, hungry. Daniel's hands were steady as he photographed the cairn, documented the message, checked his GPS. 48.7124 dig, 121.0891 degree W, elevation 4,503 feet. All data points, all facts, nothing here that couldn't be explained by human activity. Ashley could have built this herself, could have written the message before whatever happened to her happened. Except the scratches in the dirt were too deep. He knelt and measured them with his finger, 4 inches into packed earth studded with rock. You'd need a tool for that kind of depth, something metal, something strong. And the edges of each letter were smooth, almost polished, as if worn by water over centuries rather than carved hours ago. His Motorola XTS 5000 radio hissed with a burst of static that resolved into the voice of Karen, the Marble Mount dispatcher. Ranger Kowalski, checking status. You're running late for check-in. Over. Daniel thumbed the transmit button. Kowalski here. I'm at Thunder Creek Mile 12 investigating evidence related to the Nguyen case. Found subject's jacket at Mile 7, possible cairn marker at current location. Continuing to Mile 15. We'll check in at 1800 hours. Over. Copy that. Be advised, Weather Service is calling for temperature drop tonight. Possible snow above 4,000 feet. Don't push it too far. Over. Understood. Kowalski out. He clicked off the radio and stood, shouldering his pack. The weight was familiar, reassuring. 3 liters of water, first aid kit, emergency bivvy, fire starter, extra batteries, protein bars, topographical maps. Standard overnight patrol kit. He'd done this loop dozens of times. The trail climbed steadily toward Trikuni Peak, switchbacking through old growth that hadn't seen significant fire damage in centuries. Daniel knew the statistics. North Cascades National Park encompassed 504,654 acres, 93% designated wilderness, hosting approximately 20,000 visitors per year across all regions. Thunder Creek Trail saw maybe 300 hikers annually. Remote, isolated, easy to disappear in. But people didn't just disappear. They fell. They got hypothermic. They made bad decisions and suffered consequences. There was always an explanation. Always a chain of causation that led from A to B to C. The third marked location appeared at Mile 15, like a wound in the landscape. The trees had been cleared in a perfect circle, 40 feet in diameter. Every trunk cut at exactly the same height, 7 feet. The cuts were smooth, surgical, impossible without power tools that no one could have hauled this far up the trail. In the center of the clearing sat Ashley Nguyen's backpack, unzipped and empty. Daniel approached slowly, every nerve firing warnings his rational mind tried to suppress. This was evidence. This was a crime scene. This required documentation and protocol, and careful preservation of everything he saw. The backpack's contents had been arranged in concentric circles around it. Inner circle, sleeping bag, tent, camp stove. Middle circle, clothing, neatly folded. Outer circle, food packaging, emptied, every wrapper and can and bag torn open and licked clean. A week's worth of supplies consumed. He photographed everything, hands steady through pure will, while his mouth filled with saliva that tasted like copper. The food packages bothered him most. Not the fact that they'd been emptied. That made sense if someone was hungry enough. But the way they'd been arranged, the precision of it, and the fact that every single item showed signs of teeth. Not human teeth. The marks were too large, too numerous, scattered across the packaging like something had gnawed frantically, unable to satisfy itself. Daniel collected samples, documented everything, checked his GPS one more time. 48.7634 degree N, 1 and 21.1276 degree DW. Elevation, 5,287 feet. The sun was dropping toward the peaks, throwing long shadows across the cleared circle. He had maybe 90 minutes of good daylight left. His training said to return now, report findings, wait for the SAR team to mount a proper search with full support. His gut said Ashley Nguyen was still out here somewhere, and every hour mattered. He made the call based on data. Core temperature still stable, weather holding, enough light to reach the next ridge and assess. He'd turn back if conditions deteriorated. The trail beyond Mile 15 climbed steeply, gaining 800 feet in the next mile. Daniel's breath came harder, not from exertion but from the cold that had intensified to an aching pressure in his chest. His thermometer read 42 degrees. It felt like 20. He found the blood at Mile 16. Not a lot, just a smear across a boulder beside the trail, dark and oxidized but recent enough that his field test confirmed it was human. AB positive. Same blood type listed in Ashley's medical records that her sister had provided. Daniel swabbed it, sealed it, marked the location. Evidence, facts. A story beginning to emerge. The story said Ashley had made it this far. The story said she'd been injured, bleeding. The story said she'd continued up the trail anyway instead of turning back. Why? Daniel looked up the path, watching it disappear into shadows between the hemlocks. The silence pressed against his ears like physical weight. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing. He noticed the trees here were damaged, not stripped like the spiral Douglas fir, but marked with deep gouges that ran parallel to the ground, 4 or 5 lines together, spaced like fingers. Except no bear could reach 10 feet up a trunk, and no bear left marks that deep. Daniel touched one gouge and found it sticky with sap that had frozen in the cold. Fresh. Hours old, maybe. Something was bleeding these trees. His scientific mind provided the word. Exudate. Trees produced resinous sap in response to injury, a defense mechanism against pests and disease. But this was wrong. Too much sap, and it had a smell, sharp and organic like decomposition, that made him pull his hand back and wipe it on his pants. The radio crackled again. Ranger Kowalski, 1800 hours check-in. Respond. Over. He checked his watch, 6:03 p.m. He'd been hiking for 7 hours. Kowalski here, currently at mile 16, still investigating. Found human blood, AB positive, consistent with subject. Trail markers and evidence suggest subject continued upward. Requesting permission to proceed to mile 17, terminus of maintained trail. Over. Static. Long pause. Then Karen's voice, tight. Negative, Kowalski. Weather's turning worse than forecast. Temperatures dropping to teens tonight. You need to return to station. We'll mount full SAR at first light. Over. Daniel looked up the trail. Another mile. That's all. 1 more mile to where the maintained path ended and the true wilderness began. If Ashley had gone beyond that point, SAR would need specialized teams, possible helicopter support, days of searching. Copy. Returning to station. Kowalski out. He clicked off the radio and stood still in the gathering dark, listening to nothing. Then he heard it. A voice, distant and thin, calling from higher up the mountain. Not words exactly, more like the shape of words, the ghost of human speech drifting through the trees with the first needles of snow that were beginning to fall. Daniel's analytical mind categorized the sound. Auditory stimulus, possibly wind through tree branches creating harmonic resonance that the brain interprets as speech. Possible explanation? Rational. But he knew what he'd heard. Someone was up there. He started climbing. The trail deteriorated rapidly beyond mile 16, maintained path giving way to rough scramble over loose scree and exposed roots. Snow fell harder, fat flakes that caught in his eyelashes and melted against his neck. His headlamp carved a narrow tunnel through the dark. Everything beyond its reach an absolute void. At 6,147 feet elevation, the trees ended. Above, only bare rock and ice stretched toward Trikuni Peak's summit. Daniel swept his headlamp across the transition zone and saw it immediately. A cave entrance, small and irregular, half hidden behind a boulder fall. And leading to it, a trail of bare footprints in the fresh snow. Human feet, small. Woman size 7, same as listed in Ashley's description. Except they were wrong. The stride was too long, the depth inconsistent, and the toes. Daniel knelt and examined the clearest print. The toes showed elongation, the proportions distorted. He stood and aimed his light at the cave. The footprints went in. None came out. Ashley Nguyen. His voice cracked against the stone and died without echo. If you can hear me, this is Park Ranger Daniel Kowalski. I'm here to help you. Please respond. Silence. Then from inside the cave, that sound again. The ghost of words, closer now, almost understandable. Daniel pulled out his Motorola and keyed it. Nothing but static. Too much rock, wrong angle for relay towers. He was alone. He entered the cave. The passage was narrow, forcing him to turn sideways, rock scraping his pack. His headlamp showed stone walls slick with ice, the floor descending at a steep angle. The footprints continued, clearer here in the thin layer of snow that had blown inside. He followed them down. The cave opened into a chamber maybe 20 feet across, ceiling lost in darkness above. Daniel's light found the walls first, covered in markings, thousands of them scratched and gouged and carved into the stone. Spirals. The same spiral pattern from the tree, from the cairn, repeated endlessly, overlapping, some ancient and worn smooth, others fresh and sharp. Then his light found Ashley. She sat against the far wall, naked, her skin waxy and pale as rendered fat. Her eyes were open, tracking his light. Her mouth moved, forming words without sound. Oh, Jesus. Daniel dropped his pack and rushed forward, already pulling out his emergency blanket, his med kit. Ashley, I'm Ranger Kowalski. I'm going to help you. Can you hear me? Her lips kept moving, not words, chewing motions, rhythmic, constant. Her jaw worked, but nothing came out. Daniel wrapped the emergency blanket around her and checked for vitals. Pulse present, but thready. Body temperature far too low. His digital thermometer gave an error reading below its minimum threshold of 90 degrees. She should be dead. Hypothermic victims didn't stay conscious at these temperatures. Ashley, can you understand me? Blink if you can hear me. Her eyes fixed on his face. She blinked once, twice. Her chewing mouth kept moving. I'm going to get you out of here. We need to get you warm. Can you walk? She shook her head slowly, and for the first time Daniel saw what his light had missed. Her legs were wrong. The proportions were stretched, elongated. The knees bent backward in a way that made his stomach lurch. Not broken, reformed. The bones had curved and reshaped into something that wasn't quite human anymore. His scientific mind tried to process it. Impossible skeletal reconfiguration. No disease or injury pattern consistent with observed deformation. No rational explanation. Ashley's mouth opened wider than it should have been able to, and she spoke in a voice that sounded like wind through a frozen tunnel. So hungry. Daniel scrambled backward, his headlamp beam jerking across the cave. His hand found his radio automatically, muscle memory, even though he knew it was useless. The static hissed like laughter. Ashley stood. The motion was fluid and wrong, her elongated legs straightening with joints that bent in too many places. The emergency blanket slid off her shoulders. In his headlamp's beam, he saw that her torso had thinned, her ribcage visible through skin that looked stretched over a frame that had grown too large for it. I tried not to, she said, and her voice carried a horrible note of apology. I tried so hard, but it wouldn't stop. The hunger wouldn't stop. Daniel's back hit the cave wall. His hand closed around his canister of bear spray, the only weapon he carried. Ashley, we can get you help. There are doctors, specialists. I ate it all. Her head tilted at an angle that human necks couldn't achieve. Everything I brought. Then I found the deer. Then the rabbit. Then... She took a step toward him, that horrible backward bent leg folding and extending. It's never enough. I'm never full. Do you understand? Never. The last word came out as a shriek that bounced through the cave and split into harmonics that sounded like multiple voices screaming at once. Daniel's training dissolved. Every hour of classroom instruction, every protocol, every procedure meant for bear encounters and lost hikers and medical emergencies. None of it covered this. His body made the decision his mind couldn't. He ran. He scrambled back through the narrow passage, pack abandoned, bear spray still clutched uselessly in his hand. Behind him he heard Ashley, the thing that had been Ashley, following with a skittering sound of too many joints bending, moving fast. He burst out of the cave into the snowstorm that had intensified to near whiteout conditions. His headlamp showed him only swirling white, the trail invisible. He ran anyway, down the mountain, boots sliding on loose scree, arms windmilling for balance. The scientific part of his brain, still trying to function, noted that he was making every mistake. Running at night, in a storm, on dangerous terrain, panicked and disoriented. He fell hard, knee-slamming rock, and slid 15 feet before catching himself on an exposed root. Pain shot through his leg, bright and clarifying. He forced himself still, listening. The skittering had stopped. The only sound was wind and his own ragged breathing. Daniel aimed his headlamp back up the slope, nothing but snow and stone, and the dark mouths of scattered boulders. Then he saw the eyes, reflective, glowing amber in his light, far too high off the ground. watching him from 40 feet up a sheer rock face where nothing should be able to stand. He scrambled to his feet and kept moving, forcing himself into a controlled descent instead of blind flight. His knee protested but held. His headlamp battery indicator blinked yellow, less than an hour of light left. The tree line appeared like salvation, the hemlocks emerging from the snowstorm with their dark, sheltering branches. Daniel crashed through the threshold and immediately felt the temperature shift upward, the wind blocked by the forest canopy. He stopped behind a massive trunk, chest heaving, and checked his GPS. 5,234 feet elevation. He'd descended over 1,500 feet. Mile marker 15 was another 2 miles ahead. If he could reach the cleared circle, reach Ashley's campsite, he'd have open ground, visibility, maybe a chance to what? His radio didn't work. His emergency beacon was in his pack, abandoned in the cave. His only chance was to keep moving down, get to lower elevation where radio contact might be possible, call for extraction. A sound reached him through the trees, chewing. Wet and rhythmic, the crack of bone, the tear of tissue. He swept his light toward it and saw nothing but forest. The sound stopped. Daniel! His name spoken in Ashley's voice, but from 3 different directions at once, the syllables broken and scattered. Daniel, Dan, Dan, Daniel, 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 and Daniel, and Daniel, and Daniela, and Daniel. He ran again, weaving between trees, his light bouncing wildly. The chant followed, sometimes ahead of him, sometimes behind, always from multiple sources that moved through the forest in ways that violated every law of physics he knew. His foot caught on something and he went down face first into snow and leaf litter. He rolled, bringing his light around, expecting to see her, whatever Ashley had become. Instead, his beam found what had tripped him. A body. Male, wearing the tattered remains of a park ranger uniform, face frozen in a scream, ribcage torn open and empty. The name tag was still attached to the shredded jacket. Martinez. Daniel's mind supplied the information automatically. Ranger Carlos Martinez reported missing 5 years ago while on solo patrol of Thunder Creek Trail. Search called off after 3 weeks. Presumed dead due to exposure or fall. Body never recovered. The body had been here for 5 years, being fed on. Daniel could see it in the marks on the bones, the spiral scratched patterns gouged into frozen flesh, the evidence of something returning again and again to feed. He lasted almost 2 months. Ashley's voice came from directly above him. Daniel looked up and saw her clinging to a tree trunk 20 feet overhead, body folded in impossible angles, face elongated into something that was no longer even remotely human. The hunger made me strong enough to catch him, but he was too afraid. His meat turned bitter with fear. Yours will be better. You're trying so hard to understand. Your thoughts taste like copper in winter. Daniel's hand, operating on pure instinct, raised the bear spray and pressed the trigger. The stream shot upward, catching her, full in the face. The shriek that followed wasn't remotely human. It was wind and branches breaking and ice splitting and 1,000 other natural sounds compressed into a voice of pure rage. The thing that had been Ashley fell from the tree, limbs flailing, and Daniel didn't wait to see where it landed. He ran. His headlamp died at mile marker 12, the battery finally giving out. He kept moving by feel, one hand on his compass, the other extended to catch himself when he stumbled. The forest was absolute darkness. Snow still falling, covering his tracks even as he made them. The chewing sounds followed him, sometimes close, sometimes distant, a constant reminder of what hunted him through the dark. And worse than the sounds, he felt it now, the hunger, like a ghost of sensation in his own belly, an emptiness that went beyond physical need, a void that nothing could fill. His scientific mind, still struggling to function, presented the word his cultural education had always dismissed. Wendigo. Algonquian legend. A creature of insatiable hunger, created when humans resorted to cannibalism during winter starvation, transformed into something that could never be satisfied no matter how much it consumed. The more it ate, the hungrier it became, locked in an eternal cycle of need. Myth, folklore, cultural narrative to prevent cannibalism taboos. except he'd seen it. Seen Ashley transformed, her body reshaped by something that operated outside the laws of nature he'd built his life around. His foot hit something flat and hard. The trail. Actual maintained trail with gravel and drainage and survey markers. Mile marker 11 appeared in the darkness like a pale gravestone. He grabbed it and used it to orient himself downward. The hunger grew stronger. Daniel realized with mounting horror that he could feel where Ashley was, the presence of her hunger like a beacon in the dark, drawing him even as he fled. The connection was forming, the thing inside her reaching out to plant its seed in him, the whisper of what it would be like to never be full, never satisfied, never enough. He bit his tongue hard enough to draw blood, using the pain to focus. The metallic taste filled his mouth, and for a moment the hunger intensified to a roar that almost dropped him to his knees. No. His hands found a tree trunk and he held on, forcing himself to breathe. He was Daniel Kowalski. He had a master's degree in forest ecology. He knew the Latin names of every plant species in this park. He knew soil composition and fire succession patterns and wildlife migration routes. He knew real, measurable, documented truth. But he also knew something else now. There were hungers in the world that science hadn't cataloged, transformations that biology couldn't explain, and some disappearances weren't about being lost at all. They were about being changed. Mile marker 7 appeared through the snow, the spiral-stripped tree still standing like a monument to the impossible. Daniel stopped and stared at it, understanding suddenly what it meant. This was a marker, a territory sign. This was where the Wendigo's range began, where it had marked its hunting ground. How long had it been here? How many rangers had disappeared over the years, their bodies written off as exposure or falls, never knowing they'd been fed upon by something that grew stronger with each meal? His Motorola crackled to life. "Ulski, respond." Karen's voice, broken but present. "Readings show, storm, extraction." He grabbed the radio with shaking hands. "Kowalski here. Emergency situation, Thunder Creek, Mile 7. Subject Ashley Nguyen is..." How did he explain this? "Subject is extremely dangerous. Possible exposure-related psychotic break has attacked..." The radio died again, his words cut off. But it had worked, even briefly. Lower elevation meant better signal. He just had to keep moving. Mile marker 5. 4, 3. Each number brought him closer to the trailhead, to his truck, to civilization and electric lights and other people and all the things that couldn't possibly coexist with what he'd seen. The hunger was fading, or maybe he was just learning to live with it. That gnawing emptiness that promised to grow with each passing hour unless he fed it, fed it so feed it, thungry soul, hungry, never full, never enough. Daniel bit his tongue again, harder. Blood filled his mouth and he spat it into the snow. Mile marker 1 appeared, and beyond it the parking area, and his truck, and Ashley stood in the middle of the trail. Not the transformed thing from the cave. Ashley, as she'd looked in the photo her sister had showed him. Petite, athletic, wearing her teal North Face jacket with yellow reflective strips. Her face was human, her body proportioned correctly, her eyes reflecting his emergency light with normal human brightness. "Please," she said, and her voice was hers. No wind tunnel resonance, just the desperate plea of someone lost and alone. "Please don't leave me here. I'm so scared. I don't know what's happening to me." Daniel stopped 20 feet away, every muscle locked in conflict. His analytical mind presented the data. Possible temporary reversion, psychological manipulation, predator mimicry to lure prey. His human heart said, "This is Ashley Nguyen, 26 years old, graduate student in environmental science, someone's sister, someone who came to these woods for peace and found something that unmade her." "Ashley." His voice came out surprisingly steady. "I can't help you, not like this, but I can make sure others know, make sure this doesn't happen again." Her face crumpled. No, please, I just need food, just a little food, and I'll be okay again, I promise, just let me..." She blurred into motion, impossibly fast, the human disguise shredding away as her body elongated, and her jaw unhinged and her legs bent backward with a sound like wet wood splitting. Daniel had his radio in his hand. He threw it as hard as he could, watched it arc through the falling snow, watched Ashley's head track it automatically, predator instinct following movement. He ran for his truck, keys in the ignition where he always left them, hand shaking as he turned them, engine grinding once, twice, catching on the third try. Headlights blazed to life, illuminating the parking area and the trail, and the thing that was sprinting toward him with a skittering four-legged gait. Daniel slammed the truck into reverse, tires spinning in fresh snow, then forward, then accelerating down the Forest Service road as fast as he dared on the icy surface. In his rearview mirror, he saw Ashley standing at the edge of the light, her elongated form swaying, before the darkness swallowed her completely. He drove for 2 hours without stopping, down out of the mountains, following the Cascade River Road until it joined the highway, then south toward Marble Mount, hands locked on the wheel, mind carefully blank. The ranger station was lit up when he arrived, emergency vehicles clustered in the parking lot. Karen met him at the door, her face tight with worry that dissolved into relief. "Jesus Christ, Kowalski. We've been trying to raise you for hours." "Weather service." She stopped, seeing his face. "What happened?" Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. What happened? He'd found evidence of a missing person. He'd documented it according to protocol. He'd followed the trail into terrain that exceeded safety parameters. He'd encountered the subject in a state of severe medical distress. He'd been forced to retreat when the subject became aggressive. All true. All explainable within the framework of normal emergency response. The rest, the transformations, the hunger, the thing that lived in the cave and fed on those who ventured too far up Thunder Creek Trail, that wasn't in any protocol. That required words his profession didn't have, explanations his education hadn't prepared him for. "I found evidence of the subject at multiple locations," he said finally, "but I wasn't able to make contact. Weather conditions forced me to abort the search. We need to..." He stopped, thinking of SR teams climbing to mile 15, to mile 16, to that cave. "We need to declare the search suspended due to hazardous conditions." Karen's face tightened. "Daniel, her sister is here. She's been waiting for news. You can't... The subject is deceased." The words came out flat, automatic. Probable exposure. Body recovered would require technical climbing team in favorable weather conditions. Minimum 1 week before conditions allow for recovery operation. It was a lie. But it was the kind of lie that would keep people away from Thunder Creek Trail for a while, at least until he could figure out what to do with the truth. Karen studied his face, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'll make the notifications. You should go home. Get some rest. You look like hell." Daniel nodded and walked to his office, closed the door, and sat down at his desk. The hunger was still there, a pilot light in his gut, but manageable. For now. He pulled up the park's historical records on his computer and searched for missing persons, Thunder Creek area, last 20 years. The list loaded slowly. 11 names. 11 people who'd gone into those woods and never come out. 11 searches that had been called off due to terrain, weather, lack of resources. 11 people whose bodies had never been recovered. 11 people who might have become exactly what Ashley had become. Or maybe there was only one. One original Wendigo, feeding and growing stronger, and the rest were simply meals that had lasted weeks or months before finally being consumed entirely. Daniel didn't know, but he understood now why the Algonquian people had created stories about these things, why they'd developed taboos and warnings and cultural practices to prevent the transformation. Not because it was myth, because it was real, and the only defense was to name it, to make it speakable, to ensure that everyone knew what waited in the places where hunger met. Desperation met something ancient that still remembered how to change human flesh. He typed up his report, keeping it clinical and factual and completely inadequate. Then he pulled out a piece of paper and wrote something else, something that wouldn't go in any official file. To whoever reads this, don't go beyond mile 15 on Thunder Creek Trail. Mark it closed. Fence it off. Tell people it's dangerous terrain, unstable rock, whatever lie keeps them away, because something lives there, And it's always hungry, and once you feel that hunger yourself, you'll understand why this is the kindest warning I can give you. He folded the paper and put it in his desk drawer, along with all the other things he couldn't say in official reports. Then Daniel Kowalski went home, ate 3 meals worth of food, and still felt empty. He reported to work the next day, and the day after that, and every day following, watching hikers set out on Thunder Creek Trail, watching them come back safe and satisfied, watching and waiting for the day when someone would venture too far and he'd have to make the same decision he'd made last night. Lie, and protect them from a truth they weren't ready for. Or tell the truth, and watch them go up the mountain anyway, because some hungers were too strong to be denied. The spiral-stripped tree was still there at mile 7. He checked on it every patrol. The marking was clear to anyone who knew how to read it. Beyond this point, something waits that will hollow you out from the inside, drink the marrow from your bones, and transform you into a hunger that can never be satisfied. But most people don't speak the language of warnings. They see a beautiful trail, a challenging climb, an adventure into wilderness. They don't see the trap until they're already inside it. And by then, it's far too late to turn back. Daniel knew this because on his worst nights, lying awake at 3 a.m. with his stomach growling, despite the dinner he'd eaten only hours before, he could still feel that connection, that thread of shared hunger reaching back up into the mountains where something waited patiently for the next hiker to climb too high, search too far, stay too long in the woods where the trees grew in spirals and the silence was absolute, and the cold bit deeper than any natural winter could explain. He felt it, and some part of him, the part that still wanted to understand, to document, to analyze. That part wanted to go back, to see, to know, to feed. But Daniel Kowalski was a scientist, and scientists believed in evidence and data and peer review. So he kept his reports clean, his warnings subtle, his knowledge locked away where it couldn't hurt anyone else. And he never went beyond mile 7 again. The hunger would have to be satisfied with that.